The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. The sharp sting burned across Linda's cheek as she stumbled backward, her hand instinctively flying to the red mark blooming across her face. The Thanksgiving turkey sat forgotten on the table as 12 pairs of eyes stared at her, some shocked, others satisfied, all silent. Tom Peterson stood over his wife, his hand still raised, chest heaving with rage. "Don't you ever embarrass me in front of my family again," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. His mother Eleanor smirked from her chair. His brother Richard chuckled under his breath. His sister Patricia rolled her eyes as if Linda deserved it. But then, boss, from the corner of the room came a voice so small, yet so sharp it could cut through steel. "Daddy!" Every head turned toward 9-year-old Olivia Peterson, who stood by the window with her tablet clutched against her chest. Her dark eyes, so much like her mother's, held something that made the air in the room shift. Something that made Tom's confidence near falter. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice steady and eerily calm for a child. "Because now Grandpa is going to see." The color drained from Tom's face. His family exchanged confused glances. But Linda saw something else creeping into their expressions, a flicker of fear they couldn't yet name. "What are you talking about?" Tom demanded, but his voice cracked. Olivia tilted her head, studying him with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. "I've been recording you, Daddy, everything, for weeks." Her small fingers tightened around the tablet. "And I sent it all to Grandpa this morning." The silence that followed was deafening. Tom's family began to shift uncomfortably in their chairs, suddenly understanding that something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. "He said to tell you," Olivia continued, her small voice carrying the weight of impending doom, "that he's on his way." And that's when they started to pale. That's when the begging began. 3 months earlier, Linda Peterson had been standing in the same kitchen, methodically basting the turkey while her hands shook with exhaustion. The bruise on her ribs from last week's lesson still ached with every movement, but she couldn't let it show. Not today, not with Tom's corporate dinner party just hours away, not when any sign of weakness would be seen as ammunition. "Linda, where the hell are my cufflinks, the silver ones with the onyx inlay?" Tom's voice boomed from upstairs, and she flinched despite herself. "In your dresser, honey, top drawer, blue velvet case," she called back, her voice carefully modulated to avoid triggering another explosion. Olivia sat at the kitchen counter, supposedly working on her science project, but Linda knew she was watching. She always watched now, those intelligent eyes, missing nothing. At 9 years old, she had learned to read the warning signs better than Linda had the set of Tom's shoulders when he walked through the door, the particular way he cleared his throat before launching into a tirade, the dangerous quiet that preceded his worst moments. "Mom," she said softly, not looking up from her project. "Are you okay?" The question hit Linda like a physical blow. How many times had Olivia asked her that? How many times had she lied and said yes? Everything was fine. Daddy was just stressed. Adults sometimes disagreed, but it didn't mean anything. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she whispered, the lie bitter on her tongue. Olivia's pencil stilled. "No, you're not." Before Linda could respond, Tom's heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. "Linda, this house is a mess. The Morgans will be here in an hour, and you can't even—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Olivia watching him. For a brief moment, something that might have been shame flickered across his features, but it vanished so quickly. Linda might have imagined it. "Olivia, go to your room," he said tersely. "But Dad, I'm working on my science project. It's due Monday." "Go, now." Olivia gathered her materials slowly, deliberately. As she passed by Linda, she squeezed her hand, a tiny gesture of solidarity that nearly broke Linda's heart. At the kitchen doorway, she paused and looked back at Tom. "Be nice to Mom," she said simply. Tom's jaw tightened. "Excuse me. She's been cooking all day, even though she's tired, so just be nice." The audacity of a 9-year-old standing up to her father left Tom momentarily speechless. But Linda saw the dangerous flash in his eyes, the way his hands clenched into fists. "Olivia, go," she said quickly, trying to diffuse the situation. The girl nodded and disappeared upstairs, but not before Linda caught the determined set of her jaw, so much like her grandfather's when he was preparing for battle. "That kid is getting too mouthy," Tom muttered, turning his attention back to Linda. "You're raising her to be disrespectful." "She's just protective," Linda said carefully. "She doesn't like seeing what—" His voice dropped to that dangerous whisper that made her blood run cold. "Are you telling her stories about us, Linda?" "No, Tom, I would never, because if you're poisoning my daughter against me, there will be consequences." His daughter, as if Linda had no claim to the child she'd carried for 9 months, nursed through every illness, held through every nightmare. The doorbell rang, saving her from having to respond. Tom straightened his tie and transformed instantly into the charming husband and host his colleagues knew and admired. The switch was so seamless, it was terrifying. "Showtime," he said with a cold smile. "Remember, we're the perfect family." Tom Peterson hadn't always been this way. At least, that's what Linda told herself in the dark hours of the night when sleep eluded her. When they'd met 12 years ago at the financial firm where they both worked, he in investment management, she in accounting, he had been ambitious. Yes, but also attentive and seemingly kind. The changes came gradually after they married. First, it was criticism disguised as concern, then control masked as protection. By the time the verbal abuse escalated to physical, Linda was already isolated from friends, financially dependent, and carrying their child. What Linda didn't understand then, but had pieced together over the years, was how deeply Tom's upbringing had shaped him. William Peterson, Tom's father, had been a respected businessman with a public persona of success and a private reality of alcoholism and violence. Eleanor, his mother, had perfected the art of looking the other way, of blaming the victim, of protecting the family image at all costs. "You knew what kind of family you were marrying into," Eleanor had once told Linda after witnessing Tom's verbal evisceration of his wife at a family gathering. "We're Petersons. We have standards to uphold." Those standards apparently included Richard, Tom's older brother, who treated his wife Rachel with the same dismissive contempt, though he seemed to stop short of physical violence, and Patricia, Tom's younger sister, who had internalized the family's toxic dynamics so thoroughly that she saw Linda's very existence as an affront to their social standing. He could have had anyone, Patricia often said, within Linda's earshot. A lawyer, a doctor, someone who could actually contribute to his career. Instead, he got stuck with a bookkeeper. Linda had been more than a bookkeeper. She'd been on track for her CPA certification when she met Tom. She'd had dreams of financial independence, of a career that mattered. Tom had initially encouraged those ambitions until they married. Then he'd sabotaged her exam preparations, created emergencies on study days, told her she was too stupid to succeed, that she'd embarrass him by failing. When she became pregnant with Olivia, he'd demanded she leave her job to focus on the family. And by the time she realized what was happening, the isolation was complete. Now, at 38, Linda Peterson was a shadow of her former self. The vibrant, confident woman who had once managed million-dollar accounts now flinched at sudden movements and apologized for breathing too loudly. She maintained the perfect suburban home in a wealthy Connecticut neighborhood, drove a luxury SUV to school drop-offs and grocery runs, and wore designer clothes to charity events where she stood silently by her husband's side. From the outside, the Petersons were the perfect American success story. Inside, they were a case study in domestic terrorism. Tom's corporate dinner party that night went exactly as expected. Linda played hostess flawlessly, serving the perfect meal, laughing at the right moments, never speaking unless spoken to. Tom basked in admiration from his colleagues, accepting compliments for the food Linda had prepared, the home she had decorated, even the child she had raised. "You've got it all figured out, Peterson," said James Morgan, Tom's boss, as he accepted a glass of 30-year-old scotch. "Beautiful home, beautiful wife, brilliant kid. What's your secret?" Tom smiled, placing a hand on Linda's shoulder that to anyone else would look affectionate. She felt his fingers dig in, a warning. "I just run a tight ship," he said with a wink. "Right, darling." Later, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Tom found Linda in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. "Morgan's wife asked why you never came back to work after having Olivia," he said, his voice deceptively casual. "Apparently, she remembers you being quite ambitious." Linda kept her eyes on the dishes. "What did you tell her? That you discovered your true calling was being a mother and homemaker?" He took a sip of his scotch. "Did you say something to her in the kitchen when I wasn't around?" "No, Tom. She just asked if I missed working. And I said sometimes, but that I loved being there for Olivia." His hand came down on the counter with enough force to make the glasses rattle. "So you did complain." "I didn't. You made me look bad, like I'm some kind of controlling husband who keeps his wife locked up at home." The irony was so painful she almost laughed. "Almost. I'm sorry, Mom," she said automatically. "I didn't mean to imply—" The back of his hand caught her across the cheekbone, not hard enough to leave a mark, but enough to make her vision blur. "Next time, just say you're living your dream life. Is that so hard to show a little gratitude for everything I provide?" He left her there, clutching the edge of the sink, waiting for her heart to stop racing. When she finally went upstairs, she found Olivia sitting on the top step, her small face solemn in the dim hallway light. "You heard," Linda said. It wasn't a question. Olivia nodded. "Why does he hurt you?" "Mom," Linda sat beside her daughter, pulling her close. "It's complicated. Sweetheart, Daddy has a lot of pressure at work, and sometimes he doesn't know how to handle his feelings. Mrs. Nelson says nobody has the right to hurt someone else, no matter how they feel," Olivia said, referring to her school counselor. "Mrs. Nelson is right," Linda said carefully. "But adult relationships are complex." Olivia looked up at her, those eyes far too old for her years. "Is it because of Grandpa Peterson? The way he treated Grandma?" Linda stiffened. "What do you know about that? I heard Aunt Patricia talking to Uncle Richard at the 4th of July barbecue. She said Dad turned out just like their father. Is that why you stay? Because you think Daddy can't help it?" The perceptiveness of this child both amazed and terrified Linda. "Partly she admitted. "And partly because sometimes it's hard to leave a situation even when you know you should. Because you're scared." "Yes, I'm scared too, Mom." Olivia's voice trembled for the first time. "Sometimes I think he might really hurt you, like really bad." Linda hugged her tighter, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo. "I won't let that happen, I promise." But even as she said it, she wondered how she could possibly keep that promise. She had no money of her own, nowhere to go, and the one time she tried to leave 2 years ago, Tom had found them at the budget motel and charmed the police officers who responded to the disturbance call. "My wife is having some emotional problems," he'd said with just the right amount of concern in his voice. "I'm just trying to get her home where she can get the help she needs." The officers had looked at her lack of visible bruises, at her evident panic, and had seen a hysterical woman rather than a terrified victim. They'd advised Tom to get her some help and left them there. The next day, Tom had canceled her credit cards and placed a tracker on her phone. Linda kissed the top of Olivia's head. "It's late, sweetheart. Let's get you to bed." As she tucked her daughter in, Olivia asked one last question. "Mom, is Grandpa Carter as strong as Daddy?" Linda smiled, thinking of her father, Colonel William Carter, whose military bearing and moral compass had shaped her childhood. "Grandpa is the strongest man I know." Olivia nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good, that's what I thought." Olivia Peterson was not an ordinary 9-year-old. Her teachers called her precocious, her classmates sometimes found her intense, and adults often described her as an old soul. But beneath her serious exterior and exceptional intelligence was a child carrying a burden no child should bear. Monday morning found her sitting in Miss Rebecca Winters' 4th grade classroom, trying to focus on fractions while her mind replayed the sound of her father's hand striking her mother's face the night before. It hadn't been a bad one, not like the time he'd pushed Mom into the refrigerator so hard it left a dent in the door. But it had been enough to make Mom's eyes water, enough to make her quiet and careful for the rest of the evening. "Olivia, are you with us?" She looked up to find Miss Winters watching her with concern. The other children were working on their worksheets, but Olivia's paid to remain blank. "Sorry, Miss Winters, I was thinking." The teacher smiled kindly. "Must be some pretty important thoughts. Can you stay a moment after class? I'd like to talk to you." Panic fluttered in Olivia's chest. Had she done something wrong? Would Miss Winters call her parents? Would Dad be angry? When the bell rang and the other students filed out for recess, Olivia remained in her seat, stomach churning. Miss Winters pulled a chair beside her. At 32, Rebecca Winters was the kind of teacher children naturally trusted, warm, observant, and genuinely interested in her students' well-being. She'd been watching Olivia with increasing concern over the past few months, noting the changes in the once enthusiastic child. "I noticed you've been distracted lately," she said gently, "and you've been quiet during group activities. Is everything okay at home?" Olivia's fingers tightened around her pencil. The rule was absolute family business, stays within the family. Dad had made that clear more times than she could count. "Everything's fine," she said, the same lie her mother told so often. Winters nodded, not pushing. "Did you know I'm teaching a special unit next week? It's about families and how they communicate." Olivia looked up, curious despite her anxiety. "What kind of unit?" "Well, we'll be learning about how different families solve problems, how they talk to each other, and what healthy relationships look like." Ms. Winters' voice remained casual, but her eyes were watchful. "We'll also talk about what to do if someone in a family is being hurt." Something shifted in Olivia's expression, a flash of recognition quickly suppressed. As part of the project, students will be documenting their observations about communication. Some will take notes. Others might record conversations or take photos with permission. Of course. Record like with a tablet or phone. Exactly, documentation is an important skill for school, for understanding the world around us, and sometimes for protecting ourselves and others. The word protecting hung in the air between them. "Is this for a grade?" Olivia asked carefully. "Yes, but more importantly, it's about learning life skills." Miss Winters hesitated, then added, "Olivia, if you ever need to talk about anything at all, my door is always open. And whatever you tell me stays between us unless I believe you're in danger. Do you understand what I mean by that?" Olivia nodded slowly. "You mean like if someone was hurting someone else?" "Yes. If I believe someone is being hurt, I have a responsibility to help them. That's my job as a teacher and as an adult who cares about my students." Olivia absorbed this information, her quick mind already forming connections, possibilities, plans. "When does the project start?" "Next Monday. We'll spend the week learning about documentation methods, and then students will have 2 weeks to collect their observations." For the first time in days, Olivia felt something like hope stir in her chest. "I think I'll be really good at this project." Ms. Winters smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "I think you will be too, Olivia. I think you already are." That afternoon, Olivia sat cross-legged on her bed, holding her tablet. It was the latest model. Dad always made sure she had the best of everything, as if expensive gifts could compensate for the fear that permeated their home. She opened the camera app, then the voice recorder, testing both, thinking. Her mother was downstairs preparing dinner. Dad wouldn't be home for another hour. This was her chance. She crept down the hallway to her parents' bedroom, heart pounding. What she was considering felt both terrifying and necessary. If she was caught, the consequences would be severe. But if she did nothing, what then? How long before Dad's lessons escalated beyond what Mom could endure? Olivia had seen the documentaries on TV when her parents thought she was asleep. She knew about domestic violence, Even if no one had ever named what happened in their house, she knew that sometimes women died at the hands of their husbands. The thought of losing her mother made her chest tight with fear. She slipped into the bedroom and looked around. The king-size bed was perfectly made, the surfaces dust-free, everything in its place exactly as Dad demanded. On Mom's nightstand sat a framed photo of Grandpa Carter in his full military uniform, standing tall and proud. Beside it was a smaller photo of Mom holding baby Olivia, both of them smiling. Olivia picked up the second photo, studying her mother's face. She looked different then. Her smile reached her eyes. Her posture was straight and confident. Nothing like the careful, hunched way she carried herself now. A sound from downstairs made Olivia jump. She quickly replaced the photo and retreated to her room, but not before making her decision. The family communication project would be her cover, and somehow she would use it to save her mother. The next day after school, Olivia began her research. The school library had limited information on domestic violence, but she found a book about the legal system that included a chapter on evidence collection. She took careful notes. Evidence must be clear and verifiable. Documentation should include dates, times, and specific actions. Patterns are important to establish. Third-party witnesses strengthen a case. In criminal matters, evidence must be obtained legally. She didn't fully understand all the terminology, but she grasped the essential concept if she wanted to help her mother. She needed proof that couldn't be denied or explained away. That evening, she positioned her tablet carefully on the bookshelf in the living room, angled to capture the main seating area, and hit record. Then she went to the kitchen where her mother was preparing dinner. "Can I help?" she asked. Linda smiled, the tight, controlled smile that had replaced her real one years ago. "Sure, sweetie. Want to set the table?" They worked in companionable silence until the front door opened and closed. Linda's shoulders immediately tensed. Tom Peterson's voice called out, "Something smells good." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his suit from work, his tie loosened. To an outsider, he would have looked like any successful businessman coming home to his family. But Olivia saw her father's hands tremble slightly as she stirred the sauce. "Dinner's almost ready," Linda said. "How was your day?" "Stressful. The Anderson account is falling apart because someone in accounting can't follow basic instructions." He dropped his briefcase on a chair. "What are we having? Lasagna. Your favorite?" He nodded, then noticed Olivia. "Hey, kiddo, how was school?" "Good. We're starting a new project next week about family communication." The words came out in a rush, part of her improvised cover story. Tom frowned. "What kind of project?" "We have it to document how families talk to each other, take notes and stuff." "Sounds like a waste of time. You should be focusing on math and science, not touchy-feely garbage." Olivia swallowed her fear. "Winters says understanding communication is important for success in any field." Tom snorted. "Ms. Winters probably couldn't get a real job, which is why she's teaching 4th grade." "Tom," Linda said quietly, "Rebecca Winters has a master's degree in education. She's an excellent teacher." It was a small act of defiance, but Olivia saw the flash of anger in her father's eyes. "Did I ask for your opinion?" His voice had that dangerous edge. "Or are you suddenly an expert on education now?" Linda immediately backtracked. "I just meant that she seems very qualified, that's all." "Well, next time wait until I ask before sharing your valuable insights." Tom turned back to Olivia. "This project, you're not recording anything in this house. Are you?" Olivia's heart hammered. "No, Dad, just taking notes." He studied her face for a moment, then seemed satisfied. "Good, Baham. Because what happens in this family is private. You understand that, right?" "Yes, Dad. Family business stays in the family, always." As he left the kitchen to change for dinner, Olivia exchanged a glance with her mother. Neither spoke, but both understood the threat underlying his words. That night, after retrieving her tablet and hiding it under her mattress, Olivia lay awake thinking about her grandfather. Colonel William Carter lived 3 states away in Virginia. his military career having taken him far from his only daughter. He called Olivia every Sunday without fail, and twice a year, summer and Christmas, she spent 2 weeks at his house. Blissful respites from the tension at home. Grandpa Carter had never witnessed Tom's behavior firsthand. Whenever he visited, Tom was the perfect son-in-law, charming and attentive, and Linda never told her father the truth, afraid of what might happen if these two powerful men collided. But Olivia had almost told him, last summer, when she'd found herself alone with her grandfather on his back porch. They'd been watching fireflies emerge in the twilight when he had asked, "Is everything okay at home?" She'd hesitated, the truth burning in her throat, but fear had won out. "Yes, Grandpa, everything's fine." He hadn't pressed, but his eyes, so much like her mother's, had held concern. "You know, you can tell me anything. Right, anything at all. I know. And if you or your mom ever needed help, I'd be there. No questions asked." She'd nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Now, staring at her darkened ceiling, Olivia wondered what would have happened if she'd told him then. Would he have believed her? Would he have helped them escape? Or would her father have managed to charm and manipulate his way out of it, as he had with the police officers that night at the motel? She needed evidence. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. Reaching under her mattress, she pulled out her tablet and opened a new document. At the top, she typed Peterson Family Communication Project. Below that, she wrote, "Day 1, Dad threatens Mom for expressing an opinion about my teacher." It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning. Every Sunday at exactly 4 p.m., the Peterson household phone rang, and every Sunday, Olivia raced to answer it, knowing who would be on the other end. "Hello, soldier," came the deep, warm voice of Colonel William Carter. "Hi, Grandpa." Olivia settled into the window seat in the living room, her designated spot for these weekly calls. Tom and Linda were at a charity golf tournament, leaving Olivia with Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly neighbor who occasionally babysat. "How's my favorite granddaughter this week?" he asked, the familiar question bringing comfort. "I'm your only granddaughter, Grandpa," she replied, following their usual script. "Which makes you my favorite by default. How's school?" Olivia hesitated. This was where she normally launched into a detailed account of her week's academic achievements, playground politics, the book she was currently reading. But today, 2 weeks into her secret documentation project, she needed more than just her grandfather's listening ear. She needed his guidance. "School's okay," she said carefully. "We're doing a project about family communication and problem solving." "Sounds interesting. What have you learned so far?" Olivia glanced at Mrs. Abernathy, who was dozing in an armchair across the room. "We learned that different families have different ways of solving problems. Some talk things out. Some yell. Some hurt each other." There was a brief silence on the other end. "That's true," Colonel Carter finally said, his voice more measured. "What else have you learned?" "We learned about documentation, about how sometimes when people won't listen or believe you, you need evidence." Another pause. Longer this time. "Olivia," her grandfather said slowly, "is there something specific you want to tell me about this project?" Her heart raced. This was her opening, but fear still gripped her. What if he didn't believe her? What if he told her parents what she'd said? What if it made everything worse? "Grandpa," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "if someone was hurting someone else in their family, what would you do?" The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. "I would help them," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "I would do whatever was necessary to keep them safe, even if it was someone in our family, especially then." His voice had taken on a steel edge she rarely heard. "Family doesn't hurt family. Olivia, real family protects each other. Always." Tears pricked at her eyes. "That's what I thought." "Olivia," her grandfather said, and she could hear him choosing his words with military precision. "Is someone hurting you?" "Not me," she whispered. The sharp intake of breath told her he understood. Your mother, she couldn't bring herself to say it directly. I've been keeping track, documenting, like we learned in school. That's very brave and very smart, he said, and she could hear him shifting into what her mother called his colonel mode, strategic, focused, decisive. How long has this been happening? For as long as I can remember, but it's getting worse. Does your mother know you're telling me this? No, she's afraid. She thinks no one will believe her. Dad is really good at making people think he's perfect, and Mom is not. Colonel Carter was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled but vibrating with emotion. Olivia, I need you to listen carefully. What you're doing documenting what's happening is exactly right, but you need to be very, very careful. Your safety and your mother's safety are the most important things. I am being careful, she assured him. I hide my tablet. I only record when it's safe. Dad doesn't suspect anything. Good girl. Now, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make some calls to people who can help us, and I'm going to come visit soon. But we can't let your father know that this conversation happened. It would put you and your mother in more danger. Can you keep this between us for now? Yes. I'm going to need to see your documentation when the time is right. Can you find a way to send it to me securely? Olivia thought for a moment. I could email it to you from my school account. Dad doesn't have access to that. Perfect. One more thing, Olivia, this is very important. If at any time you feel that you or your mother are in immediate danger if things escalate suddenly, I want you to call 911 immediately. Don't wait. Don't try to handle it yourself. Get help right away. Promise me. I promise. You're the bravest person I know. Olivia Peterson, and I've commanded troops in 3 war zones. Despite everything, she smiled. Mom says I get it from you. She's right about that. Carter women have steel in their spines. His voice softened. I love you, soldier, and I love your mother. I'm going to make this right. I love you too, Grandpa. After they hung up, Olivia sat in the window seat for a long time, watching the autumn leaves drift from the maple tree in their front yard. For the first time in years, she felt something like hope. The next morning, Miss Winters pulled Olivia aside during recess. How's the family communication project going? She asked, keeping her voice casual as children ran and shouted on the playground around them. It's educational, Olivia replied carefully. Ms. Winters nodded. I've noticed you've been very focused on the documentation aspects. That's good, but remember to take care of yourself too. What do I mean? Sometimes when we observe difficult situations, it can affect us emotionally. It's important to have support people you can talk to about what you're seeing and feeling. Olivia studied her teacher's face, trying to determine how much she knew or suspected. I have my grandpa, she said finally. He listens. Ms. Winters smiled. I'm glad. He sounds like an important person in your life. He's a colonel in the army. He protects people. That's a noble calling. Ms. Winters hesitated, then added, Olivia, there's something I'd like you to know. As your teacher, if I believe a student is witnessing or experiencing harm, I'm required by law to report it to people whose job it is to help. Olivia's heart skipped. You mean like social workers? Yes, or what's called child protective services. Their job is to make sure children and families are safe. But what if... Olivia struggled to articulate her fear. What if they talk to the person doing the harm, and that person convinces them nothing is wrong? What if they make things worse? Miss Winters' expression grew serious. That's why documentation is so important. The kind you're doing for your project. Evidence makes it harder for harmful behaviors to be denied or explained away. Olivia nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Ms. Winters wasn't just teaching a random unit on family communication. She was giving Olivia tools and a cover story. Ms. Winters, if someone was collecting evidence of bad things happening in their family, where would they send it to make sure the right people see it? The teacher seemed to choose her words carefully. In an ideal situation, such evidence would go to both protective services and law enforcement. But sometimes, especially with domestic violence, the best first step is to share it with a trusted adult who has the power and resources to help, like a lawyer or a soldier. Yes, someone with authority who can advocate for those being harmed. Ms. Winters placed a gentle hand on Olivia's shoulder. Olivia, is there anything you want to tell me? Anything I can help with? Olivia thought of her grandfather's advice to be cautious, of her mother's fear, of the complex web she was navigating. Not yet, she said finally. But maybe soon. Ms. Winters nodded, accepting this. My door is always open. And Olivia, you're doing the right thing. Whatever it is, you're doing the right thing. As the recess bell rang and students lined up to return to class, Olivia felt the weight of her secret project both burden and strengthen her. She was 9 years old, navigating a world of adult violence and institutional systems she barely understood. But she wasn't alone. She had her grandfather's military strategy, her teacher's professional guidance, and her own determined spirit. That afternoon, she added a new entry to her documentation, day 15. Mom asked if she could take a yoga class at the community center. Dad said no, that she'd embarrass herself with her clumsiness, and that she didn't deserve to waste his money on stupid hobbies. Mom cried in the bathroom later when she thought I couldn't hear. Each entry was a brick in the wall of evidence she was building. Each documented incident brought them one step closer to freedom. But time was running out. Thanksgiving was approaching, and with it, the annual gathering of the Peterson family, a pressure cooker of judgment and cruelty that invariably pushed Tom to his worst behavior. Olivia needed to accelerate her plan. After 2 weeks of careful documentation, she had compiled over 30 separate incidents of verbal abuse, 5 of financial control, and 3 of physical aggression. But she knew from her research that more was better. More evidence, more witnesses, more patterns established. She opened her tablet's calendar and made a decision. Thanksgiving was in 3 weeks. She would continue documenting until then, building her case day by day. And then when the entire Peterson family was gathered as witnesses, she would set her final plan in motion. The stakes couldn't be higher. But as her grandfather had said, Carter women had steel in their spines. And Olivia Peterson was her mother's daughter and her grandfather's granddaughter. She would not fail. The first moment of real terror in Olivia's documentation project came 17 days in, when she nearly lost everything. She'd been recording from her tablet, which she'd hidden behind a stack of books on the living room shelf, capturing her father's tirade about a dinner that had been served 5 minutes late. The verbal assault had escalated until Tom had grabbed Linda's wrist, twisting it as he backed her against the wall. Olivia, watching from the doorway, had been so focused on her mother's fear that she'd forgotten about her tablet until Tom stormed out of the room and headed directly toward the bookshelf. "Where's my business week?" he demanded, scanning the shelves. "It was right here." Olivia froze as his hand reached for the very shelf where her tablet lay hidden, its camera still recording. In that moment, she made a split-second decision. "Dad," she called, deliberately knocking over her glass of water. "I'm sorry I spilled everywhere." Tom turned, irritation flashing across his face. "For God's sake, Olivia, can't you be more careful?" But the distraction worked. He abandoned his search for the magazine and went to the kitchen for paper towels, giving Olivia just enough time to dart forward, grab her tablet, and slip it into her sweater pocket. Later that night, after transferring the video to her secure school cloud account and deleting it from her tablet, Olivia lay in bed, heart still racing from the close call. The risk was enormous. If her father discovered what she was doing, there was no telling how he might react. But the alternative, doing nothing, watching her mother disappear a little more each day, waiting for the violence to escalate beyond repair, was unthinkable. She thought of her grandfather's words, "Family protects family," and with that mantra in her mind, she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. 2 days later, Olivia received a notification on her school email account. A new contact request from W. Carter at militarysecure.gov. Her grandfather had created a secure channel for her to send her documentation. She accepted immediately and sent her first batch of files with a simple message. Grandpa, this is what happens at our house when you're not here. There's more. I'm still collecting. Please help us. Love, Olivia. His response came within hours. Received. Reviewing. Continue with caution. But know that the wheels are now in motion. You've done the hardest part. Soldier. Now let me do mine. I love you both. Grandpa, as Thanksgiving approached, Olivia's documentation became more strategic. She focused on capturing not just her father's behavior, but the enabling dynamics of the extended Peterson family. A phone call where Grandma Eleanor berated Linda for not keeping Tom happy. A family dinner where Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia mocked Linda's background and education while Tom smiled approvingly. She was building not just a case against her father, but against the entire toxic system that supported and encouraged his abuse. The final piece came during a Sunday dinner at Eleanor Peterson's home, where Tom's mother held court like a queen surveying her domain. Olivia had positioned her tablet in her open backpack, angled toward the dining room. Linda, dear, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I noticed you've put on a few pounds. Stress eating. Perhaps you really should take better care of yourself. Tom works so hard to provide for you. Before Linda could respond, Patricia jumped in. It's not like she has anything else to do all day. No, Joe, one child in school, I'd kill for that much free time. Some women aren't ambitious, Richard added with a smirk. They're content to just exist. Tom sat back, enjoying the show as his family did his dirty work for him. Linda said nothing, her eyes fixed on her plate, her face a mask of practiced neutrality. But then Eleanor turned her attention to Olivia. And you, young lady, your father tells me you've been quite outspoken lately. That's not becoming in a girl your age. I'm just honest, Grandma, Olivia replied, keeping her voice carefully respectful. There's honest and then there's disrespectful. I understand you've been recording your little family observations for some school project. I hope you're presenting the Peterson family in an appropriate light. Olivia's blood ran cold. How did Eleanor know about her project? Had Tom mentioned it? Was he suspicious? It's just about communication styles, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. How different families talk to each other. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Well, I'm sure you've observed that in this family. Children are seen and not heard, and wives know their place. Isn't that right, Tom? Tom smiled, raising his wine glass. Mother knows best. That night, Olivia sent the recording to her grandfather with a new message. This is what Thanksgiving will be like, but worse. They're all like this. They all help him hurt Mom. Are you ready? His response was immediate and resolute. I've seen enough. Plan is in place. Key people have been briefed. On Thanksgiving, when I arrive, stay close to your mother. No matter what happens, remember you've done everything right. I'm proud of you, soldier. As Olivia closed her tablet, she felt the weight of the past weeks, the fear, the vigilance, the terrible responsibility pressing down on her. But alongside it was a new feeling, determination. In just a few days, everything would change. Her mother would be free. They both would. She didn't know exactly what her grandfather had planned, but she trusted him completely. Colonel William Carter had never lost a battle. He wouldn't lose this one either, not when the stakes were his daughter's life and his granddaughter's future. Olivia Peterson was 9 years old, but in the weeks since she'd begun her documentation project, she'd become something more: a strategist, a protector, a force to be reckoned with. And on Thanksgiving Day, the world would see exactly what she was made of. Thanksgiving morning dawned cold and clear, sunlight glinting off frost-covered lawns in their affluent neighborhood. Inside the Peterson home, Linda had been awake since 5, preparing the elaborate meal Tom expected for his family. Olivia found her mother in the kitchen, already dressed in the outfit Tom had selected for her, a modest navy blue dress that Eleanor had once commented made Linda look appropriately subdued. Morning, Mom, Olivia said, climbing onto a stool at the island. Can I help? Linda smiled, the tight, controlled smile that had replaced her real one years ago. Good morning, sweetheart. You can help me with the place cards if you'd like. They're in the dining room. Olivia nodded but didn't move. Mom, she said carefully, is Grandpa coming today? Linda looked surprised. Grandpa Carter, no more, honey. He's in Virginia. Remember, we'll call him after dinner, though. What if he decided to come as a surprise? A shadow crossed Linda's face, concern mixed with something else. Longing, perhaps. That would be complicated. Your father's family doesn't particularly care for my father. You know that. Because he sees through them, Olivia said matter-of-factly. Linda set down her knife, giving her daughter a searching look. Olivia, is there something you are not telling me? Before Olivia could respond, Tom's voice came from the doorway. Telling you about what? Linda startled, nearly dropping the bowl she was holding. Olivia was just asking if my father might visit today. Tom's expression darkened. The Colonel, why would he come without warning? That would be incredibly rude. It was just a question. Dad, Olivia said, struggling to keep her voice casual. I miss Grandpa. That's all. Tom studied his daughter for a moment, suspicion flickering in his eyes. But whatever he might have said was interrupted by the ringing of his phone. He checked the screen. It's Mother. I need to take this. As he left the room, Linda turned back to Olivia. Honey, what's going on? Did you talk to Grandpa about coming here today? Olivia hesitated. The plan required secrecy, but she hated lying to her mother. Not exactly, she said carefully. But I think things might change today. Linda's face paled. What does that mean, Olivia? If you've done something... I've done what I had to do, Olivia said, her voice suddenly older than her years. To protect us. Before Linda could press further, Tom returned, his expression sour. Mother wants to come early to help you in the kitchen. I told her you have everything under control, but you know how she is. They'll be here at noon instead of 2. Linda nodded, her earlier concern about Olivia momentarily forgotten in the face of this new stress. I'll make sure everything's ready. See that you do. The last thing I need is Mother criticizing my wife's housekeeping. Tom straightened his sweater. I'm going for a run. When I get back, I expect this place to be spotless. As soon as he left, Linda turned back to Olivia. What did you mean things might change today, Olivia? Please, if something's happening, I need to know. Olivia took a deep breath. Mom, do you trust me? Of course I do, but then trust me now. I can't explain everything, but I promise it's going to be okay. Better than okay. Linda knelt in front of her daughter, taking her small hands. Olivia, you're scaring me. Whatever you're planning, whatever you think is going to happen, your father won't react well. You know that. I know, but this time, he won't have a choice. Olivia squeezed her mother's hands. Mom, you've been protecting me my whole life. Now it's my turn to protect you. Linda's eyes filled with tears. That's not how it's supposed to work. I'm the parent. It's my job to keep me safe, I know, but we're a team, right? And sometimes teammates have to help each other. Linda studied her daughter's face, seeing determination where fear should be, strength where vulnerability would be expected. What have you done, Olivia? What you taught me to do. Stand up for what's right. Olivia hugged her mother tightly. I have to get dressed. Grandma will be here soon. As she left the kitchen, Olivia felt her tablet vibrate in her pocket. A message from her grandfather en route, ETA 1400 hours. Team in place. Operation Freedom is go. Stay calm and follow the plan. I love you, soldier. Olivia sent a quick reply. Roger that. Target's family are arriving early noon. We'll send alert when confrontation begins. Love you too, Grandpa. Upstairs in her room, Olivia changed into the dress her father had approved for the occasion, a conservative plaid with a white collar that Eleanor had called suitably traditional. She added the matching headband, though she hated how it pulled at her hair, knowing that every detail of her appearance would be scrutinized by the Peterson family. Then she checked her tablet one last time, ensuring it was fully charged and that all her documentation was backed up to the secure cloud account. Today's recording would be the most important of all, the final piece of evidence, the public display of Tom's true nature that not even his family could deny or explain away. Olivia's hand trembled slightly as she slipped the tablet back into its hiding place inside her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear with a secret compartment in its back. She wasn't naive enough to think today would be easy. There would be anger, denial, perhaps even greater danger before it was over. But for the first time in her young life, Olivia Peterson felt something she'd almost forgotten: power. Not the false power of bullies like her father, who confused fear with respect and control with strength, but the real power that came from standing up for the truth, from protecting those you love, from facing fear and doing what's right anyway. It was the kind of power her grandfather had taught her about during their Sunday calls and summer visits, the power that had carried him through war zones and guided his leadership, the power that lived in the Carter bloodline and that flowed through her veins, regardless of the Peterson name she carried. "Olivia," Tom's voice echoed up the stairs. "Come down and help your mother. My family will be here any minute." Olivia took one last look in the mirror, straightening her headband. "Coming, darling," she called back. Then, under her breath, she whispered the mantra her grandfather had taught her. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're afraid." And with those words fortifying her spirit, Olivia Peterson walked downstairs to set in motion the plan that would change her family forever. The Peterson family arrived at precisely noon, descending on the house like a well-dressed invasion force. Eleanor led the way, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her critical gaze immediately scanning the entryway for flaws. Behind her came Richard and Rachel, their designer clothes and matching expressions of superiority announcing their status. Patricia brought up the rear, already tapping on her phone, barely acknowledging Linda's greeting. "Linda, dear," Eleanor said, air-kissing her daughter-in-law's cheek. "The house looks adequate, though I notice the brass mail holder is tarnished. Such details matter in a home, don't they?" "Yes, Eleanor," Linda replied automatically. "I'll take care of it right away." "Mother, don't start," Tom said, appearing from the living room with forced joviality. "It's Thanksgiving. Let's at least pretend to be thankful." He kissed his mother's cheek. "You look wonderful." Eleanor beamed at her son, her demeanor instantly transforming. "Tom, darling, working too hard as usual. You look tired. Just closing the Anderson deal. It's been intense." "Well, that's what separates the Petersons from everyone else," Richard chimed in. "We understand sacrifice and hard work." He cast a meaningful glance at Linda. "Some people just don't have that drive." Linda absorbed the barbs silently, her face a practiced mask of pleasantness. "Can I get anyone a drink? I've made mulled cider, or there's wine." "I'll handle the drinks," Tom interjected. "You should check on the turkey. Mother likes it moist, not dry like last year." As the adults moved to the living room, Olivia watched from the bottom of the stairs, cataloging each subtle insult. Each moment her mother was undermined or dismissed. Her tablet was tucked inside the pocket of her dress, already recording. Rachel, Richard's wife, was the only one who caught her eye and offered a small, sympathetic smile. Of all the Petersons, Rachel was the least cruel. Though she rarely intervened when the others attacked Linda, Olivia had often wondered if Rachel was afraid of becoming the next target. "Olivia," Eleanor called, noticing her granddaughter. "Come give Grandma a proper hello, and straighten that headband. It's crooked." Olivia dutifully approached and allowed her grandmother to adjust her headband, wincing as Eleanor tugged it painfully tight. "There. Much better. A Peterson always looks impeccable." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "What's that in your pocket?" "It looks bulky." Olivia's heart skipped. "Just my tablet. Grandma, for games. Games on Thanksgiving." Eleanor scoffed. "When I was your age, children entertained adults with conversation and piano recitals, not electronic distractions." "Sorry, Grandma, I'll put it away." Olivia started to turn, desperate to hide the evidence of her recording. Let me see it first, Eleanor demanded, holding out her hand. Tom mentioned you've been doing some sort of school project about families. I want to make sure you're not recording us without permission. The room went silent. Tom looked up sharply from the bar where he was pouring drinks. Olivia, is that what you're doing? Panic gripped Olivia's chest. This wasn't part of the plan. The confrontation wasn't supposed to happen until her grandfather arrived. She wasn't ready. It's not, I wouldn't, she stammered. Linda appeared in the doorway, sensing the tension. What's going on? Your daughter appears to be spying on us, Eleanor said coldly. After all we've done for both of you, the ingratitude is astounding. I'm not spying, Olivia protested. It's for school. Ms. Winters assigned it. Then you won't mind showing us, Tom said, his voice dangerously calm as he crossed the room. Hand it over. Olivia. Now. Olivia looked desperately at her mother, silently pleading for help. Linda stepped forward, placing herself between Olivia and Tom. Tom, it's just a school project. All the children are doing it. Then there's no reason she can't show us. Tom held out his hand. Tablet, now. Olivia's mind raced. Everything, all her carefully gathered evidence, all her plans. Her mother's safety hinged on this moment. If her father saw what she'd been recording, there was no telling what he might do. But if she refused, a sudden, sharp knock at the front door broke the standoff. Who could that be? Eleanor asked irritably. I thought it was just family today. Tom frowned. We're not expecting anyone else. I'll get it, Linda said quickly, grateful for the interruption. When she opened the door, she froze in shock. Dad. Colonel William Carter stood on the threshold in his civilian clothes, pressed khakis, and a tailored blazer, but his military bearing was unmistakable. His tall frame filled the doorway, his silver hair cut in the same precise style he'd worn for 40 years of service. Hello, Linda, he said, his voice warm as he embraced his startled daughter. Surprise. Linda returned the hug automatically, her confusion evident. I had no idea you were coming. Why didn't you call? It was a last-minute decision. Colonel Carter's eyes scanned the entryway, taking in the scene behind Linda, where the Peterson family stood in various states of surprise and displeasure. His gaze finally rested on Olivia, who was staring at him with naked relief. There's my girl, he said, and Olivia broke away from the group, running to throw her arms around her grandfather. You came, she whispered against his chest. Of course I did. Soldier. He murmured back. I promised. Didn't I? Tom stepped forward, his face arranged in a welcoming smile that didn't reach his eyes. Colonel Carter, this is unexpected. We weren't aware you'd be joining us for Thanksgiving. I hope I'm not imposing, Colonel Carter replied with equal insincerity. When Olivia mentioned the family gathering, I thought it might be a good opportunity to see everyone. Eleanor emerged from behind Tom, her displeasure evident despite her social smile. How enterprising of you to travel all this way without notice. We're quite a full house already. I'm not staying long, Colonel Carter assured her. Just long enough. The last two words hung in the air with unmistakable intent. Olivia felt her grandfather's hand on her shoulder, a reassuring pressure. The tablet in her pocket no longer felt like a burden, but like a weapon loaded and ready. Well, Linda said, breaking the tense silence. Let me set another place at the table. As she hurried to the dining room, Colonel Carter's eyes followed her, narrowing slightly as he noticed the rigid set of her shoulders, the careful way she moved. Then his gaze shifted to Tom, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. So, Tom, he said conversationally, how's business? The next hour unfolded in a surreal tableau of forced politeness and underlying tension. Linda moved between kitchen and dining room, putting final touches on the Thanksgiving meal while fielding Eleanor's criticisms and unsolicited advice. Tom, Richard, and Patricia closed ranks, exchanging meaningful glances whenever Colonel Carter spoke. Colonel Carter himself sat in the living room, engaging in seemingly innocent conversation that nevertheless probed at the Peterson family dynamics. He asked about Tom's work, about family traditions, about how decisions were made in the household, each question innocuous on its surface, but designed to reveal the power structures Olivia had documented. Through it all, Olivia stayed close to her grandfather, her tablet safely in her pocket, still recording. She caught her mother watching them with increasing concern, clearly sensing that something significant was happening beneath the veneer of holiday pleasantries. When Linda finally announced that dinner was ready, the family moved to the dining room where the table was set with Eleanor's heirloom china and crystal, a requirement for any Peterson family gathering. "Everything looks lovely, Linda," Colonel Carter said as they took their seats. "You've clearly put a lot of work into this meal." "Thank you, Dad," Linda replied, the simple appreciation bringing a flush to her cheeks. Compliments were rare in this house. Eleanor sniffed. "It's what's expected. Colonel, in our family, we maintain certain standards." "Standards are important," Colonel Carter agreed mildly. "In my experience, the highest standard is how we treat those we claim to love." A heavy silence followed this statement. Tom cleared his throat and reached for the carving knife. "Shall I do the honors?" Without waiting for a response, he began slicing the turkey with theatrical precision. The meal proceeded with the usual Peterson family dynamics on full display. Eleanor criticized the dressing for being too moist. Richard expounded on his latest business triumph. Patricia scrolled through her phone between bites, occasionally making cutting remarks about Linda's choice of centerpiece or tableware. Colonel Carter observed it all, his expression neutral, but his eyes missing nothing. When Eleanor made a particularly nasty comment about Linda's weight, he intervened smoothly. "I've always thought my daughter was beautiful," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to command. "Inside and out." Eleanor's mouth tightened. "Of course you would think so. A father's bias is natural." "Not bias, Eleanor. Recognition of worth." Colonel Carter turned to Linda. "Speaking of which, how's that accounting certificate coming along last we spoke? You were considering renewing your studies." The table went silent. Linda's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Tom's hand tightened around his wineglass. I haven't had the chance to pursue that," Linda said carefully. "Why not?" Colonel Carter asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Linda's priorities are here, with her family." Tom interjected before his wife could respond. "She has responsibilities, Colonel. Not everyone can chase personal ambitions at the expense of their duties." "Interesting perspective," Colonel Carter replied. "In my experience, fulfilled individuals make better partners and parents. Suppressing someone's potential rarely leads to a healthy family dynamic." "With all due respect, Colonel," Eleanor said icily, "you're a guest in our family gathering. These matters are really none of your concern." "That's where you're wrong, Eleanor," Colonel Carter said, setting down his fork. "My daughter's happiness and well-being are very much my concern. Always have been, always will be." Tom laughed, but the sound was strained. "Linda is perfectly happy. Aren't you, darling?" All eyes turned to Linda, whose face had gone pale. She looked at her husband, then at her father, then at Olivia, who was watching her with a mixture of hope and fear. I, Linda began, her voice faltering. "Of course she's happy," Eleanor declared. "She has everything a woman could want: a beautiful home, a successful husband, a child. What more could she possibly need? Dignity." Colonel Carter said quietly, "Respect, safety." The word safety landed like a grenade on the table. Tom's face darkened dangerously. "What exactly are you implying, Colonel?" Colonel Carter met his son-in-law's gaze steadily. "I think you know exactly what I'm implying, Tom." Olivia could feel the confrontation building, approaching the moment she had both dreaded and prepared for. She slipped her hand into her pocket, ensuring her tablet was still recording. "I don't appreciate your tone," Tom said, his voice taking on the dangerous edge Olivia knew too well. "Or your insinuations, Linda. Tell your father how ridiculous he's being." Linda looked trapped, her breathing shallow. "Dad, please." "It's okay, Linda," Colonel Carter said gently. "You don't have to protect him anymore." Protect me. Tom slammed his hand on the table, making the china rattle. This is my house, Colonel, my family, and I won't be accused of whatever it is you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, Colonel Carter replied calmly. I'm stating facts, facts that have been documented extensively. Tom's head whipped toward Olivia, understanding dawning. You, he snarled. What have you been telling him? Olivia straightened in her chair, drawing strength from her grandfather's presence. The truth, Dad, that's all. What truth? Patricia demanded, looking between her brother and her niece. What's going on? I'd like to know that myself, Rachel said quietly, her eyes on Linda's pale face. Nothing is going on, Tweed insisted, his voice rising. My father-in-law is overstepping, and my daughter is confused. That's all. I'm not confused, Olivia said clearly. I know exactly what I've been doing. And what's that? Eleanor asked, her voice dangerous. Olivia looked at her mother, seeking permission. Linda's eyes were wide with fear, but behind that fear, Olivia saw something else, a flicker of the strength that had been buried for so long. Linda gave a nearly imperceptible nod. I've been recording Dad, Olivia said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Recording how he treats Mom, how he talks to her, how he controls her, how he... She swallowed hard. How he hurts her. The silence that followed was absolute. This is absurd, Tom finally said, his voice shaking with rage. My 9-year-old daughter is making wild accusations, and you're all sitting here listening as if they're not accusations, Tom, Colonel Carter interrupted. They're documented incidents. 43 days of footage, to be precise. Tom's face drained of color. What? Olivia reached into her pocket and pulled out her tablet. I recorded everything, she said quietly. When you called Mom stupid for asking about yoga classes, when you threw your dinner plate at the wall because the chicken was dry, when you grabbed her arm so hard it left bruises because she spent $10 more than you approved at the grocery store. You little liar, Tom hissed, reaching for the tablet. Give me that right now. Colonel Carter's hand shot out, gripping Tom's wrist with surprising strength for a man in his 60s. I wouldn't, he said mildly. The evidence is already backed up. Multiple copies, multiple location. Tom jerked his arm away. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly believe. We saw it, Richard interrupted, his voice strangely subdued. At the 4th of July barbecue, when Linda dropped that glass, and you took her inside, Rachel and I were on the patio. We heard you. Tom stared at his brother in disbelief. You're taking their side, my own brother. I'm not taking sides, Richard said. I'm just saying, it wouldn't be the first time. It's how Dad was, too. Don't you dare bring our father into this, Tom snarled. Why not? Patricia asked suddenly. Isn't that the point, that we all saw what Dad did to Mom, and we all pretended it wasn't happening, that we learned to accept it as normal? Eleanor slammed her napkin down. That's enough. I will not sit here and listen to my children disparage their father's memory or accuse Tom of what, Mother? Richard asked quietly. Of doing exactly what our father did, what you allowed him to do. Eleanor's face contorted with rage and denial. Your father was a great man. He provided for this family, gave us everything we have. If he was occasionally stern, it was because he had standards. He was abusive, Patricia said, the words seeming to surprise even her. We all know it. We've just never said it out loud. Tom was shaking his head, looking from his mother to his siblings. This is insane. All of you turning on me based on what? The manipulated recordings of a child, the accusations of a man who's never liked me, the paranoid ramblings of a wife who's clearly been poisoning my daughter against me. No one's turning on you, Tom, Colonel Carter said evenly. We're simply acknowledging reality, a reality your daughter was brave enough to document when the adults in her life failed to protect her mother. Tom's rage found a new target as he rounded on Linda. You put her up to this, didn't you? You've been planning this ambush, this humiliation. Linda shook her head, finding her voice at last. I had no idea. Tom, Olivia did this on her own. Liar, Tom shouted, rising from his chair, his face contorted with fury. You ungrateful, manipulative. Don't talk to my mom like that, Olivia said, her voice strong despite her trembling hands. Tom's attention snapped to his daughter. You stay out of this. This is between your mother and me. This is adult business. No, Dad, Olivia said, rising to stand beside her mother. It's family business, and family is supposed to protect each other, not hurt each other. You little... Tom took a step toward Olivia, his hand raised. What happened next occurred so quickly that Olivia would have trouble recalling the exact sequence of events. Linda leapt to her feet, placing herself between Tom and their daughter. Colonel Carter was out of his chair in an instant, moving with the speed and precision of a much younger man. And Rachel, surprisingly, was the one who cried out, Tom, don't! But it was too late. Tom's hand came down, connecting with Linda's cheek with a crack that echoed through the dining room. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward, her hand flying to her face. The Thanksgiving turkey sat forgotten on the table as 12 pairs of eyes stared at Linda, some shocked, others horrified, all silent. Tom stood over his wife, his hand still raised, chest heaving with rage. Don't you ever embarrass me in front of my family again, he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. That's when Olivia stepped forward, her tablet held like a shield. You shouldn't have done that, she said, her voice steady and eerily calm. Because now Grandpa has seen it, and so has everyone else. The color drained from Tom's face as he looked around the table at his family's stricken expressions. Even Eleanor appeared stunned, her hand pressed to her mouth. I've been recording you, Daddy, Olivia continued, her voice carrying the weight of weeks of fear and determination. Everything. For weeks, and I sent it all to Grandpa this morning. The silence that followed was deafening. Tom's family began to shift uncomfortably in their chairs, suddenly understanding that something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. He said to tell you, Olivia continued, her small voice carrying the weight of impending doom, that he's on his way. Tom's laugh was brittle. He's already here. Olivia, your little surprise didn't work. Not Dad, Linda said quietly, her hand still pressed to her cheek. The police. As if on cue, the sound of car doors slamming came from outside, followed by heavy footsteps on the front porch. Tom's face went ashen. What have you done? Colonel Carter smiled grimly. We've done what should have been done years ago. We've ensured that there will be consequences. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime incongruous with the tension in the room. That would be Detective Marshall, Colonel Carter said calmly. And with him, I believe, are representatives from Child Protective Services. He turned to Olivia. You did good, soldier. The cavalry has arrived. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Rebecca Winters sat in her classroom after hours, reviewing a disturbing collection of videos and audio recordings. Her hand occasionally rose to cover her mouth, her eyes filling with tears as she witnessed what Olivia Peterson had been documenting for weeks. A soft knock on her classroom door made her quickly minimize the screen. Come in, she called, wiping at her eyes. Principal Douglas Hernandez entered, his expression grave. You wanted to see me? Rebecca, Ms. Winters nodded, gesturing to the chair beside her desk. Thank you for coming, Doug. I have something troubling to show you. Is this about the Peterson girl? Yes, how did you know? Principal Hernandez sighed, settling into the chair. I've noticed the changes in her behavior. More withdrawn, hypervigilant. Classic signs of a child under stress. And given what you told me about her family communication project, I had my suspicions. Ms. Winters turned her computer screen toward him. Olivia shared these with me today. She's been systematically documenting her father's abuse of her mother for over a month. Dear God, Principal Hernandez murmured as Ms. Winters played one of the clips Tom Peterson berating his wife for spending money on school supplies. his voice rising to a shout before the sound of something crashing. Has she been hurt herself? Not physically, from what I can tell, but witnessing this kind of abuse. Ms. Winters shook her head. The psychological damage is significant. We need to report this immediately, Principal Hernandez said, reaching for his phone. I already have, Ms. Winters confirmed. I spoke with CPS this morning, and I've scheduled a meeting with Detective Marshall from the Domestic Violence Unit tomorrow. Good. What about the mother? Is she aware of what Olivia's been doing? I don't think so. Olivia indicated that her mother wouldn't leave, that she tried once before and her husband found them. She's afraid, and with good reason. Principal Hernandez ran a hand over his face. Tom Peterson. I've met him at parent-teacher conferences. So charming. So concerned about his daughter's education. I never would have suspected. That's how abusers operate, Ms. Winters said grimly. They maintain a perfect public image. It's one of the reasons victims have such difficulty being believed. What's the next step? CPS won't be able to act before the holiday. Olivia told me her grandfather is involved. Apparently, she's been sending him copies of everything she's recorded. He's a retired military colonel with connections in law enforcement. And Thanksgiving, the Peterson family is gathering. That's what worries me. Family gatherings often trigger escalation in abusive situations. The stress, the audience, the perceived need to maintain control. Ms. Winters bit her lip. I suggested Olivia stay home from school today to speak with her mother, to warn her what's coming. But she refused. She said it would put both of them in more danger if her father suspected anything. Smart kid, Principal Hernandez said softly. Too smart for what she's had to deal with. She's remarkable, Ms. Winters agreed. But she shouldn't have had to be. She shouldn't have had to become her mother's protector. She's 9 years old. Doug. Principal Hernandez stood. His decision made. I'm calling the superintendent and our legal counsel. We need to make sure all proper protocols are followed, but also that this child and her mother get immediate protection. He paused at the door. You did the right thing. Rebecca, creating that family communication project gave Olivia both the tools and the cover to document what was happening. I just hope it's enough. Ms. Winters said quietly. I hope we're not too late. Detective Sarah Marshall of the Domestic Violence Unit had seen a lot in her 15 years on the force. But the evidence collected by 9-year-old Olivia Peterson was among the most methodical and damning she'd ever encountered. The kid categorized it, she told her partner, Detective James Rivera, as they reviewed the files forwarded by Ms. Winters and Colonel Carter. Verbal abuse, financial control, physical intimidation, actual violence. She even noted patterns, how it escalates when his mother visits, how it's worse after he's been drinking, how he's careful not to leave visible marks most of the time. Detective Rivera shook his head. 9 years old, shouldn't be playing detective at that age. She wasn't playing, Detective Marshall said grimly. She was surviving and trying to save her mother. Their meeting with Colonel William Carter the day before Thanksgiving had only strengthened the case. The retired military officer had provided additional context, including medical records showing Linda Peterson's suspicious injuries over the past 3 years, financial documents demonstrating Tom's control of all family resources, and a detailed plan for extraction and protection. We'll be at the Peterson residence by 2:30 p.m. on Thanksgiving, Detective Marshall assured Colonel Carter. We'll have patrol cars stationed a block away, ready to move in if needed. But our goal is a controlled intervention arrest Tom Peterson with minimal drama. Get Mrs. Peterson and Olivia to a secure location and begin building the case for prosecution. Colonel Carter nodded, his military background evident in his precise questions about tactics and contingencies. And the restraining order, already prepared, Detective Marshall confirmed. Judge Ramirez is on standby to sign it as soon as we have Peterson in custody. It will bar him from approaching his wife, his daughter, or the family home. And if he violates it, immediate arrest, no bail. Judge Ramirez takes a particularly dim view of domestic abusers, especially those who victimize children. directly or indirectly. Good. Colonel Carter's face was grim. Because if the system fails my daughter and granddaughter, I want to be very clear. I will not. Detective Marshall studied the older man carefully. Colonel, as much as I sympathize with your position, I have to advise you against taking matters into your own hands. I understand the law. Detective, I've spent my life defending it, but I also understand that sometimes the law moves too slowly to protect the innocent. Colonel Carter's eyes were steel. My only goal is to ensure my family's safety. I prefer to do that through legal channels. But make no mistake, I will do whatever is necessary. Detective Marshall nodded slowly. Then let's make sure the legal channels work, for everyone's sake. While law enforcement prepared their intervention, Linda Peterson moved through her pre-Thanksgiving preparations in a fog of anxiety. Olivia's cryptic comments that morning had left her deeply unsettled. But with Tom's family arriving and 1,000 details to manage, she had no opportunity to press her daughter for explanations. By noon, when Eleanor, Richard, Rachel, and Patricia arrived, Linda was operating on autopilot, smiling at the right moments, absorbing criticisms without reaction, performing the role of perfect hostess while ignoring the knot of dread in her stomach. Something was coming. She could feel it in Olivia's watchful gaze, in the way her daughter stayed close to her whenever possible, in the secretive glances at the tablet she kept in her pocket. When her father appeared unexpectedly at the door, Linda's dread crystallized into certainty. Colonel William Carter didn't make surprise visits. He didn't insert himself into Peterson family gatherings. He didn't engage Thomas' family in pointed conversations about power dynamics and personal autonomy, which meant this wasn't a visit. It was an operation. Linda had grown up as a military officer's daughter. She recognized the signs of strategic planning, the careful positioning her father seated with sightlines to all exits, the timed extraction, his arrival calculated to disrupt the Peterson family's usual dynamics, the gathering of intelligence, his seemingly casual questions designed to expose the fault lines in the family structure. What she didn't understand was what had precipitated this intervention. Until Olivia revealed her recording project, the shock of learning that her 9-year-old daughter had been methodically documenting the abuse was eclipsed only by the realization that Olivia had independently reached out to her grandfather for help, that she had created and executed a plan more sophisticated than anything Linda herself had managed in 3 years of victimization. And in that moment of revelation, as Tom's rage built and the confrontation escalated, Linda felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling, a weight lifting, a fog clearing. For the first time in years, she saw her situation with perfect clarity, not as a failure to be a better wife, not as her cross to bear, not as the price of keeping her daughter safe, but as what it truly was: a crime. A continuing, deliberate crime being perpetrated against her by the man who had vowed to love and protect her. When Tom's hand connected with her cheek in front of the entire family, the physical pain was almost secondary to the strange sense of vindication. Finally, he had shown his true nature in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. Finally, there were witnesses who couldn't pretend they didn't see. And most importantly, there was evidence irrefutable, time-stamped, backed-up evidence gathered by a child wise beyond her years. As the doorbell rang and Detective Marshall's voice identified herself from the front porch, Linda looked at her daughter, this remarkable, resilient, resourceful child who had done what no adult in her life had managed to do. She had created an escape route. She had called in reinforcements. She had saved them both. "I love you," Linda whispered, reaching for Olivia's hand as Tom stood frozen in disbelief. "More than anything in this world." Olivia squeezed back, her small face solemn. "I know, Mom. That's why I had to do it. Because family protects family. Real family." Colonel Carter moved to open the door, and Linda felt the future rushing toward them, uncertain, frightening, but free of the terror that had defined their lives for so long. Whatever came next, they would face it together, mother and daughter, survivors rather than victims. And for the first time in years, Linda Peterson allowed herself to hope. Detective Sarah Marshall entered the Peterson home with practiced calm, her badge displayed, her partner, Detective Rivera, flanking her. Behind them came Melissa Chen from Child Protective Services, clipboard in hand, her expression professionally neutral. The tableau that greeted them in the dining room told its own story, Linda Peterson standing with her hand to her reddened cheek. Olivia beside her, tablet clutched to her chest. Tom Peterson, face contorted with rage and disbelief. The extended family frozen in various states of shock. And Colonel Carter, positioned strategically between Tom and his wife and daughter. Thomas Peterson, Detective Marshall asked, though she already knew the answer. Yes, Tom replied, struggling to regain his composure. What is the meaning of this intrusion? We're having a family dinner. I'm Detective Marshall with the Domestic Violence Unit. This is Detective Rivera and Ms. Chen from Child Protective Services. She stepped further into the room, her experienced eyes cataloging details, the overturned wine glass, the tension in Linda's posture, the protective way Olivia pressed against her mother's side. We're responding to reports of domestic violence at this address. Domestic violence. Tom laughed, though the sound held no humor. This is absurd. Who made these reports? We have multiple sources, Detective Marshall said evenly, and significant evidence. She turned to Linda. Mrs. Peterson, are you all right? Do you need medical attention? Before Linda could respond, Eleanor Peterson rose from her chair, drawing herself up with indignation. This is outrageous. My son is a respected businessman. Whatever you think happened here has been grossly exaggerated. Ma'am, I'm speaking to Mrs. Peterson, Detective Marshall said firmly, not taking her eyes off Linda. Are you injured? Linda touched her cheek, which was already beginning to bruise. It's not serious. That's not what I asked. Linda hesitated and then straightened her shoulders. My husband struck me just now, in front of everyone, but it's not the first time. She's clearly emotional. Tom interjected quickly. We had a disagreement that got heated. I barely touched her. I have it recorded, Olivia said, her voice small but clear. This time and lots of other times too. Detective Marshall nodded to Olivia. You must be Olivia, your teacher, Ms. Winters, and your grandfather have told me about your documentation project. That was very brave. Brave, Tom sputtered. She's been spying on her own family, recording private moments without consent. That's illegal. Actually, Mr. Peterson, Detective Rivera spoke up. In this state, single-party consent is all that's required for recording. And when there's reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, even that requirement can be waived. Criminal activity in my own home, this is harassment. While this exchange continued, Miss Chen moved quietly to Linda's side. Mrs. Peterson, I'd like to speak with you and Olivia privately, if possible. Is there somewhere we can go? Linda nodded, grateful for the lifeline. The kitchen, through here. As they moved toward the kitchen, Tom suddenly lunged forward. You're not taking my daughter anywhere. Detective Rivera stepped smoothly into his path while Detective Marshall's hand moved to her weapon. Sir, I need you to remain calm and stay where you are. This is my house, Tom shouted, his facade of control completely shattered. You can't come in here and dictate. Thomas Peterson, Detective Marshall interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of authority. I am placing you under arrest for domestic battery, a charge supported by eyewitness accounts and documented evidence. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the detective continued reciting his Miranda rights, Tom's face cycled through shock, rage, and finally a dawning horror as the reality of his situation became clear. This wasn't going away. This wasn't something he could charm or bully or manipulate his way out of. This was real, with real consequences. In the kitchen, Miss Chen spoke gently to Linda and Olivia. I want to assure you both that you're not alone in this. We have resources to help you: safe housing, counseling, legal advocacy, everything you need to start over. We don't have anywhere to go, Linda said, the practical concerns bubbling up through her shock. No money of our own. Tom controls everything. That's not entirely true, Colonel Carter said, joining them in the kitchen as Detective Rivera handcuffed a still protesting Tom in the dining room. I've made arrangements. Linda, an apartment is already secured in your name, with 6 months' rent paid. My attorney has drafted emergency motions for temporary spousal and child support, and your old position at Hartford Financial is available if you want it. I spoke to David Wilson last week. Linda stared at her father in disbelief. You did all that without even knowing if I would leave. Colonel Carter's eyes softened. I hoped you would, when the moment came, but I would have respected your decision either way. This had to be your choice. But how did you know? Linda's eyes widened as understanding dawned. She turned to Olivia. You've been planning this with Grandpa for how long? 43 days, Olivia said precisely. Since I told him what was happening, while Linda knelt in front of her daughter, taking her small hands. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were scared, Olivia said simply. You were trying so hard to protect me that you couldn't protect yourself. So I had to do it. The truth of those words hit Linda with the force of revelation. Her daughter was right. She had been frozen by fear. Fear of Tom's retaliation. Fear of not being believed. Fear of losing custody of Olivia. Fear of having nowhere to go. And in her paralysis, she had forced her child to become the adult, to take risks no child should have to take. I'm so sorry, Linda whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I should have been stronger. I should have gotten us out sooner. You were strong, Mom, Olivia insisted. You stayed to protect me, and now we're protecting each other. Ms. Chen cleared her throat gently. If I may, what you're both feeling is absolutely normal. Mrs. Peterson, many victims of domestic violence remain in dangerous situations out of genuine fear and practical concerns. And Olivia, many children in your situation take on responsibilities beyond their years. What matters now is that you're both safe and that you get the support you need to heal. A commotion from the dining room drew their attention. Detective Marshall appeared in the kitchen doorway. We're removing Mr. Peterson from the premises now. His family has been advised to leave as well. Mrs. Peterson, would you like to gather some belongings for yourself and Olivia? You shouldn't stay here tonight. Linda looked around the kitchen at the half-prepared Thanksgiving meal, at the home she had maintained so carefully, at the life she had endured for so long. Yes, she said, feeling the weight of fear lifting with each word. We're ready to go. As they moved toward the stairs, they passed through the dining room where Eleanor stood rigidly by the table, Patricia and Richard flanking her. Rachel had moved away from the family group, standing awkwardly near the doorway. This will destroy him, Eleanor said coldly as Linda passed. His reputation, his career, everything he's worked for. I hope you're satisfied. Linda stopped, turning to face her mother-in-law directly. For years, she had absorbed Eleanor's criticism and contempt without response. But that Linda was gone. What about what he's destroyed? Eleanor, my confidence, my career, my sense of safety in my own home. What about what he could have destroyed if this had continued my daughter's childhood? Her trust, possibly even our lives. Linda's voice was steady, her gaze unflinching. I spent years trying to be the wife you thought your son deserved. I see now that nothing would have ever been enough. Eleanor flinched as if struck. We welcomed you into this family. No, Richard interrupted, surprising everyone. We didn't, Mother. We never gave Linda a chance. We treated her like she was beneath us from day one. He turned to Linda, his expression troubled. I'm sorry, for whatever that's worth. It's worth something, Linda acknowledged, but not enough. As she turned to go, Rachel stepped forward hesitantly. Linda, I know this isn't the time, but if you ever need anything, or if Olivia does, I'd like to help. If I can. Linda studied her sister-in-law's face, recognizing the fear and uncertainty she herself had carried for so long. Are you okay, Rachel, with Richard? Rachel's eyes darted to her husband. Then back to Linda. I, we have our issues, but he's never hit you, Linda finished for her. Yet, but if you ever feel unsafe, promise me you'll get help before it escalates, before it costs you everything. Rachel nodded, tears in her eyes. I promise. With one last look at the Peterson family, Eleanor's rigid denial, Richard's dawning shame, Patricia's shocked silence, and Rachel's quiet desperation, Linda took Olivia's hand and climbed the stairs to pack what they would need for their new beginning. Behind them, the Thanksgiving table sat abandoned, the carefully prepared meal growing cold, the family facade irreparably shattered. In the master bedroom, Linda moved methodically, packing essentials into a suitcase: clothes, toiletries, medications, important documents she had secretly gathered and hidden over the years. In Olivia's room, her daughter did the same, carefully selecting favorite books, comfort items, and the school materials she would need. When they came back downstairs, Colonel Carter and Detective Marshall were waiting in the foyer. Through the front window, Linda could see a police car pulling away Tom in the back seat, his profile rigid with rage. "Ready?" her father asked gently. Linda took a deep breath, looking around at the house that had been both her prison and her protection for so long, the perfect suburban show place that had hidden so much pain and fear. "Yes," she said, surprised at the certainty in her voice. "We're ready." As they stepped outside into the crisp November air, Olivia looked up at her mother. "Mom, where are we going to have Thanksgiving's dinner now?" The simple, childlike question brought tears to Linda's eyes. After everything, the confrontation, the arrest, the family implosion, her daughter was still a 9-year-old concerned about holiday traditions. Colonel Carter answered before Linda could find her voice. "I've made reservations at the Marriott. They have a Thanksgiving buffet. It won't be home cooked, but it'll be peaceful. And tomorrow, we'll start setting up your new apartment." "A new start," Linda said, squeezing Olivia's hand. "For both of us." As they walked toward Colonel Carter's waiting car, leaving behind the perfect facade of their old life, Linda felt something she hadn't experienced in years: freedom. The road ahead would be difficult: court proceedings, financial struggles, emotional healing, but they would face it together, no longer prisoners of fear and secrets. Behind them, the Peterson house stood silent, its windows dark, its carefully maintained appearance intact. But inside, everything had changed. The walls that had contained their suffering had finally crumbled, bringing down with them the lies, the denial, and the collective silence that had allowed abuse to flourish. And at the center of this transformation stood a 9-year-old girl with a tablet and a plan, a child who had found the courage to speak truth to power and, in doing so, had saved not only her mother, but perhaps herself as well. "You know what, Olivia," Linda said as they reached the car, "I think this might be the best Thanksgiving we've ever had." Olivia smiled up at her mother, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Because we're free?" "Yes," Linda replied, feeling the truth of it settle in her own. "Because we're finally free." The Marriott Hotel dining room was nothing like the Thanksgiving Linda had spent weeks preparing. Instead of Eleanor's heirloom china and crystal, they ate from the Hadal's standard white plates. Instead of the tension-filled silence interrupted by barbed comments, soft music played in the background as other displaced families and travelers shared the holiday meal. Instead of Tom at the head of the table, radiating control and judgment, Colonel Carter sat across from them, his solid presence a reminder of their newfound safety. "Is the turkey okay?" Linda asked Olivia, watching her daughter pick at her food. "We can order something else if you'd prefer." "It's fine," Olivia said, but her usual appetite was absent. The events of the day had caught up with her, leaving her quiet and subdued. Colonel Carter noticed too. "It's been quite a day, soldier," he said gently. "A lot to process." Olivia nodded, looking up from her plate. "Is Dad going to stay in jail?" Linda and Colonel Carter exchanged glances. "For tonight, yes," Linda answered carefully. "After that, it depends on several factors." "Like what?" "Like whether the judge grants the restraining order," Colonel Carter explained. and whether your father can post bail. But regardless of what happens with those legal proceedings, he won't be allowed to come near you or your mother. But what if he does anyway? Olivia's voice was small, revealing the fear beneath her brave exterior. What if he gets mad and decides to find us? Linda reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. That's why we're taking precautions. The new apartment is in a secure building. Your grandfather has arranged for additional security measures. And most importantly, there's a legal record now, evidence that can't be denied or explained away. Evidence you collected, Colonel Carter added with unmistakable pride. You've done something remarkable. Olivia, something many adults haven't had the courage to do. Olivia considered this, pushing a piece of turkey around her plate. I was really scared, she admitted. The whole time, every time I set up the tablet to record, I thought, what if he catches me? What if it makes everything worse? Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Linda said softly. It means doing what's right even when you are scared. That's what you always told me when I had nightmares, Olivia said, a small smile finally appearing. I thought about that a lot while I was making my recordings. A comfortable silence fell as they continued their meal. Around them, other diners laughed and talked, celebrating the holiday with normal family dynamics that once seemed impossible for Linda and Olivia. Now, sitting in this anonymous hotel dining room, that normalcy suddenly felt within reach. I've been thinking, Colonel Carter said after a while. The lease on the apartment is for 6 months, which gives you time to get established. But after that, if you wanted, there's plenty of room at my place in Virginia. You could start fresh somewhere Tom has no connections. Linda considered the offer. A complete break, a new beginning in a different state, far from the Peterson family's influence. It was tempting. That's very generous, Dad. Let's see how things unfold here first. Olivia has school, and if I can get my old job back. Of course, no pressure. Just know the option is there. Colonel Carter's phone buzzed, and he checked the screen. That's Detective Marshall. They've processed Tom's arrest and are applying for an emergency protection order tonight. The judge is reviewing the evidence as we speak. All my videos, Olivia asked. A selection of the most significant ones. The detective said it's some of the clearest documentation of domestic abuse she's ever seen. You were very thorough. Olivia straightened a little at this, pride briefly overcoming her exhaustion. Miss Winters taught us about documentation. She said evidence makes it harder for harmful behaviors to be denied. Ms. Winters sounds like an exceptional teacher, Colonel Carter observed. She is, Olivia agreed. She knew something was wrong, even before I told her. She created the whole family communication project so I'd have a reason to record what was happening. Linda felt a rush of gratitude for this teacher who had seen what was happening and found a way to help when Linda herself had been too afraid to reach out. We'll have to thank her properly once things settle down. As they finished their meal and declined dessert, none of them having much appetite for pumpkin pie, Colonel Carter's phone buzzed again. Good news, he announced after reading the message. The emergency protection order has been granted. Tom will be served with it when he's released on bail, which won't be until tomorrow at the earliest. The order bars him from approaching within 500 feet of either of you or your new residence. What about our house? Linda asked. Our things. The order grants you exclusive use of the marital home for now. We can arrange for you to collect more of your belongings once Tom has been released and served with the order. Police can escort you if necessary. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in for Linda. She was starting over at 38, no home of her own, a career to rebuild, a traumatized child to support, and legal battles ahead. The freedom she felt walking out of the Peterson house was now tempered by the enormity of the challenges facing them. As if reading her thoughts, Colonel Carter reached across the table and took her hand. One day at a time, Linda, that's how we'll approach this. And you won't be doing it alone. Linda squeezed his hand, fighting back tears. I know, Dad. Thank you. Later, in the adjoining hotel rooms Colonel Carter had arranged, Linda tucked Olivia into bed. The girl was fighting sleep, her eyes heavy but her mind still racing. What happens tomorrow? She asked as Linda smoothed her hair. Tomorrow we'll go see the new apartment. Get settled in. Make a list of what we need. And after that, Linda sat on the edge of the bed, considering how to answer. After that, there will be some difficult days, legal proceedings, decisions about school and work, conversations that won't be easy, but there will also be good days. Days when we don't have to walk on eggshells or worry about saying the wrong thing. Days when we can just be ourselves. Will Dad try to take me away from you? The question was direct, cutting to Olivia's deepest fear. He might try, Linda acknowledged, choosing honesty over false reassurance. But he won't succeed. The evidence you collected, the witnesses who saw what happened today, all of it protects us now. And we have Grandpa, and Detective Marshall, and Ms. Winters, and a whole team of people who are going to help make sure we stay together. Olivia seemed to accept this, her eyes growing heavier. Mom, she murmured, already half asleep. Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad we're not going back. Linda leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead. Me too. More than you can possibly know. After Olivia had drifted off, Linda returned to her own room and stood at the window, looking out at the unfamiliar city lights. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to really feel the emotions she'd suppressed for so long. Grief for the marriage that had become a prison. Anger at the man who had systematically broken her down. Shame at having stayed so long. And beneath it all, a flickering hope for the future. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. With trembling fingers, she opened it. You think this is over? It's not. No judge, no restraining order, no interfering father is going to keep me from my family. You've made the biggest mistake of your life. Linda. Fear flooded her system, the familiar paralyzing terror threatening to drown the fragile hope she'd been nurturing, hands shaking. She took a screenshot of the message and forwarded it to Detective Marshall with a simple note. From Tom, the detective's response came quickly. Save this. Do not respond. We'll add it to the file and notify the judge immediately. This is a direct violation of his release conditions. Linda set the phone down and took a deep breath, pushing back against the fear. This was exactly what Tom wanted to reclaim control through intimidation, to make her question her decision, to remind her that he still had power over her emotional state. Not anymore, she decided, straightening her shoulders. Not ever again. She picked up her phone and composed a different message. This one to Winters. This is Linda Peterson, Olivia's mother. I wanted to thank you for what you did for my daughter, for seeing what was happening and giving her the tools to document it. You may have saved both our lives. Then she prepared for bed, setting her phone to do not disturb mode except for calls from her father or Detective Marshall. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time in years, she would sleep without fear of what might happen if she said the wrong thing, or if dinner wasn't perfect, or if Tom had a bad day at work. Tonight, she would sleep in peace. Tom Peterson did not sleep in peace. The holding cell at the county jail was a far cry from his king-size bed in his luxury home. The thin mattress, the fluorescent lights that never fully dimmed, the sounds of other detainees in nearby cells, all of it was designed to break a man's spirit, to remind him of his powerlessness. But Tom Peterson was not broken. He was enraged. How dare they? How dare Linda humiliate him like this, turning his own daughter against him, involving her father, creating this public spectacle after everything he'd provided: the beautiful home, the private schools, the vacations, the status of being Mrs. Thomas Peterson. She'd been nothing when he found her, just an accountant with no family connections, no social standing. He'd elevated her, and this was how she repaid him. And Olivia, his own daughter, spying on him, recording private family moments, betraying him to her grandfather. The thought made his blood boil. 9 years old and already manipulative, already turning on her own father. Linda's influence. No doubt. Or the Colonel's. He'd never liked William Carter, with his military rigidity and his judgmental gaze. The man had always looked at Tom as if he could see right through him, as if he wasn't good enough for Linda despite his success, his wealth, his status in the community. Well, they would all regret this. Tom Peterson was not a man who accepted defeat. He had resources they couldn't imagine, connections they didn't know about. This arrest, this humiliation, it was a setback, not an ending. He would get the best lawyer money could buy. He would spin this as a misunderstanding, a family argument blown out of proportion. He would remind the court of his standing in the community, his spotless record, his charitable contributions. He would paint Linda as unstable, manipulative, poisoning their daughter against him. And when it was over, when he had regained control of his family and his reputation, there would be consequences. Linda would learn what happened to women who publicly humiliated their husbands. Olivia would learn the price of betrayal. The colonel, well, even Tom recognized that moving directly against a decorated military officer would be unwise. But there were other ways to hurt him. Through Linda, through Olivia, through the systematic destruction of everything William Carter loved. As the night wore on and sleep eluded him, Tom's anger crystallized into cold, calculated determination. This was war now, and Thomas Peterson did not lose wars, especially not to his own wife and a 9-year-old girl. Little did he know that his very thoughts, his basic instinct to control and punish, rather than reflect and change, were already building the case against him. While he plotted revenge in his cell, his unauthorized text message to Linda was being added to the court record, strengthening the protection order and weakening his position in the battles to come. The first skirmish had gone to Linda and Olivia, but in Tom Peterson's mind, the war was just beginning. The courthouse was an imposing edifice of marble and authority, its high ceilings and formal atmosphere designed to remind all who entered of the weight and significance of legal proceedings. Linda sat on a bench in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. Beside her, Meredith Zhao, the domestic violence advocate assigned to her case, reviewed documents on her tablet. Judge Montgomery is known for being thorough, she explained. He'll want to hear all the evidence before making any decisions about the permanent restraining order or temporary custody. Linda nodded, glancing down the hallway where her father sat with Olivia, deliberately positioned so that Tom would have to pass them to enter the courtroom. 2 weeks had passed since Thanksgiving. 2 weeks of establishing a new normal in the modest apartment Colonel Carter had secured, of meetings with lawyers and advocates, of nightmares and panic attacks and moments of unexpected joy in their newfound freedom. Will Olivia have to testify? Linda asked, the thought making her stomach clench. Despite everything her daughter had already endured, the idea of her facing Tom in court, being questioned by his attorney, seemed like a new form of trauma. We're doing everything possible to prevent that, Meredith assured her. The videos speak for themselves, and we have the testimony from the Thanksgiving incident. Judge Montgomery is generally protective of children in these proceedings. And if Tom's lawyer insists, then we'll request closed-circuit testimony so Olivia doesn't have to be in the same room with him. Meredith patted Linda's hand. Try not to worry about what hasn't happened yet. One step at a time. Remember. Linda took a deep breath, forcing herself to relax. One step at a time had become her mantra, a way to prevent herself from becoming overwhelmed by the legal, financial, and emotional complexities of her new reality. The elevator at the end of the hallway dinged, and Linda tensed as the doors opened to reveal Tom, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit, accompanied by a distinguished-looking older man she recognized as Harold Brennan, one of the most expensive divorce attorneys in the state. Tom's eyes met hers across the distance, and the hatred she saw there made her blood run cold. This was not the controlled, calculated Tom who presented a perfect face to the world. This was the real Tom, the one only she and Olivia had seen until Thanksgiving Day, raw with rage and the need to dominate. Meredith followed her gaze and shifted slightly, placing herself between Linda and the approaching men. Remember, she said quietly, he has no power over you anymore. Not legally, not physically, not emotionally, unless you give it to him. Linda nodded, keeping her eyes on Tom as he approached. He looked different somehow, thinner, harder, the mask of charm completely discarded. She had expected him to play the role of wronged husband, to present himself as reasonable and conciliatory. Instead, he seemed to have embraced his rage, as if daring the court to see him for what he truly was. As Tom and his attorney neared, Colonel Carter stood, positioning himself protectively in front of Olivia. The two men locked eyes, alpha predators assessing each other's threat level. "Colonel," Tom said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Still playing white knight. Still showing your true colors, I see." Colonel Carter replied mildly, though his posture remained alert. "Charming as ever, Tom." Tom's gaze shifted to Olivia, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Hello, Olivia. Have you missed me?" Before Olivia could respond, Meredith stepped forward. "Mr. Peterson, I'm Meredith Zhao from the Family Justice Center. I must remind you that the temporary restraining order prohibits you from directly addressing Mrs. Peterson or Olivia." "I'm speaking to my daughter," Tom snapped. "I have every right." "You have the rights the court grants you," Meredith corrected firmly. "And at present, those do not include direct communication with Olivia. If you continue, I'll be once forced to report this violation to the judge." Harold Brennan placed a restraining hand on Tom's arm. "Let's go inside. Tom, this isn't the time or place." For a moment, Tom looked as if he might ignore his attorney's advice. Then, with a final glare at Linda, he allowed himself to be led into the courtroom. "You okay?" Colonel Carter asked Olivia once Tom was out of earshot. Olivia nodded, though her face was pale. "He looks different." "That's because he's not pretending anymore," Linda said, moving to sit beside her daughter. "He doesn't have to hide who he really is." "Is that good or bad?" Linda considered the question. "Both, I think. Bad because he's more openly angry. Good because it will be harder for him to convince the judge that he's the reasonable one." The courtroom doors opened again, and a bailiff emerged. "Peterson versus Peterson. Judge Montgomery is ready for you." As they rose to enter the courtroom, Linda felt a small hand slip into hers. She looked down to find Olivia watching her with those serious eyes that had seen too much. "We've got this, Mom," her daughter said with surprising confidence. "We have the evidence. Remember?" Linda squeezed her hand, drawing strength from this remarkable child. "Yes, we do. And evidence is power." The hearing for the permanent restraining order and temporary custody arrangements lasted 3 hours, far longer than Linda had anticipated. Tom's attorney fought aggressively against every piece of evidence, questioning its authenticity, its context, its admissibility. "Your Honor, these recordings were made by a 9-year-old child with a clear agenda," Harold Brennan argued. "They've been selectively edited to present my client in the worst possible light. They lack context and explanation." Judge Montgomery, a stern-faced man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness, peered over his glasses. "Mr. Brennan, I've reviewed the recordings in question. They appear to be continuous and unedited. In one, your client is clearly seen grabbing Mrs. Peterson by the throat while berating her about overcooked chicken. What possible context would make that acceptable?" Brennan shifted tactics. "My client acknowledges that there have been incidents of poor judgment during moments of extreme stress, but these isolated events have been magnified and weaponized in an effort to alienate Mr. Peterson from his child and extract maximum financial advantage in the upcoming divorce proceedings." Isolated events. Linda's attorney, Sarah Goldstein, interjected. "Your Honor, the evidence shows a pattern of escalating abuse over several years. We have medical records documenting Mrs. Peterson's injuries, testimony from witnesses to the Thanksgiving assault, and the text message Mr. Peterson sent in direct violation of the temporary restraining order, threatening his wife. That message was sent in a moment of understandable emotional distress," Brennan countered. "My client had just been publicly humiliated, arrested in front of his family, and separated from his child." "Your Honor," Sarah responded, "the nature of the message itself demonstrates exactly why this restraining order is necessary." Mr. Peterson's response to being held accountable was not remorse or self-reflection, but a threat. Judge Montgomery nodded thoughtfully. I'm inclined to agree, Miss Brennan. Your client's behavior since the initial incident has not suggested a man who recognizes the gravity of his actions. As the legal arguments continued, Linda found herself strangely detached, watching the proceedings as if from a distance. This was her life being dissected in this formal room, her pain being questioned and analyzed, her future being decided by strangers in black robes and expensive suits. Yet she felt stronger with each passing minute. Every attempt by Tom's attorney to minimize the abuse, to paint her as manipulative or unstable, only highlighted the truth of what she had endured. The very tactics that had worked so effectively in their private life, gaslighting, minimizing, blaming, fell flat in this public forum where evidence, not emotion, ruled the day. When it was Linda's turn to testify, she spoke clearly and directly, describing life with Tom without embellishment or exaggeration. She detailed the progression from controlling behavior to verbal abuse to physical violence. She explained her previous attempts to leave and the factors that had kept her trapped: financial dependence, fear for Olivia, lack of support systems, Tom's ability to present a perfect public image. Through it all, Tom watched her with barely concealed hatred, occasionally whispering furiously to his attorney. Gone was the charming, successful businessman who had fooled their community for years. In his place sat a man consumed by rage at being exposed, at losing control of the narrative that had protected him for so long. When Tom took the stand, his performance was a study in contrasts. He attempted to project sincerity and contrition, describing himself as a hard-working provider under immense professional pressure. He admitted to losing his temper on occasion but denied any pattern of abuse. He portrayed Linda as emotionally unstable, prone to exaggeration, unable to manage the household to his reasonable standards. But under cross-examination by Sarah Goldstein, the facade crumbled rapidly. When confronted with specific incidents documented in Olivia's recordings, Tom's responses grew defensive and contradictory. When asked about the Thanksgiving assault witnessed by his entire family, he blamed Linda for provoking him. When questioned about the threatening text message, he claimed he had a right to contact his wife about their family matters. With each response, he revealed more of his true nature, his sense of entitlement, his refusal to accept responsibility, his fundamental belief that Linda and Olivia were possessions to be controlled rather than people with rights and autonomy. By the time testimony concluded, even Harold Brennan looked resigned. Judge Montgomery announced a brief recess before delivering his ruling, and the courtroom emptied except for the parties directly involved. "How do you think it's going?" Linda whispered to Sarah as they sat waiting. "Better than I expected," her attorney replied honestly. "Tom is his own worst enemy on the stand. His anger keeps leaking through his reasonable man act, and Judge Montgomery has been paying very close attention to Olivia's recordings." Linda glanced across the courtroom where Tom sat conferring with his attorney, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated. He really believed he could charm his way out of this, she realized aloud. Just like he's always done. Abusers often think the systems that have protected them in private will continue to protect them in public. Sarah explained, they're used to being believed over their victims, to having their status and standing outweigh evidence of their behavior. It's a shock when that dynamic shifts. When Judge Montgomery returned to the bench, his expression was grave. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony in this matter, I am prepared to rule on the petitions before this court." The courtroom fell silent as he continued. "First, regarding the petition for a permanent restraining order, based on the substantial evidence presented, including but not limited to video documentation of multiple incidents of physical and emotional abuse, witness testimony regarding the Thanksgiving Day assault, medical records consistent with a pattern of domestic violence, and Mr. Peterson's own concerning behavior since the initial incident, I am granting the permanent restraining order." Linda exhaled slowly, feeling the first knot of tension release from her shoulders. "This order prohibits Mr. Peterson from approaching within 500 feet of Mrs. Peterson or Olivia Peterson, from contacting them directly or indirectly except through approved legal channels, and from entering their residence or places of work and education. This order will remain in effect for 2 years, at which time Mrs. Peterson may petition for an extension if necessary. Judge Montgomery turned his attention to Tom, who was sitting rigidly in his chair. Mr. Peterson, I want to be absolutely clear about the consequences of violating this order. Any breach, no matter how minor it may seem to you, will result in immediate arrest and potential incarceration. This includes attempts to contact your wife or daughter through third parties, social media, or any other means not explicitly approved by this court. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Tom responded through clenched teeth. Second, regarding temporary custody of the minor child, Olivia Peterson, Judge Montgomery consulted his notes. Based on the evidence presented, I am granting temporary sole physical and legal custody to Linda Peterson, with the understanding that a more detailed custody evaluation will be conducted as part of the divorce proceedings. Tom half rose from his seat, his face flushed with anger. Your Honor, you can't. Sit down, Mr. Peterson, Judge Montgomery ordered sharply. I'm not finished. Tom subsided, but his expression promised retribution. Mr. Peterson will be granted supervised visitation with Olivia to take place at the Family Connection Center once weekly for 2 hours. These visits will be contingent on Mr. Peterson's completion of a court-approved anger management program and a parenting class specifically addressing domestic violence issues. Furthermore, these visits will only proceed if Olivia consents to them. Linda glanced at her daughter, who was sitting very still, her face unreadable. The judge had just given Olivia agency in this most difficult of decisions whether to see her father at all. It was an unexpected gift, an acknowledgement of her maturity and her right to protect herself. Finally, Judge Montgomery continued, I am ordering Mr. Peterson to vacate the marital home within 48 hours, allowing Mrs. Peterson and Olivia to return if they so choose. Mrs. Peterson is granted exclusive use of the residence pending final property division in the divorce proceedings. Mr. Peterson may retrieve personal belongings only with police escort and advance notice to Miss Peterson. The judge set his papers aside and addressed the courtroom directly. I rarely comment on the cases that come before me, but I feel compelled to do so today. The evidence presented in this hearing depicts not just isolated incidents of violence, but a pattern of control, intimidation, and abuse that has clearly traumatized both Mrs. Peterson and her daughter. His gaze fixed on Tom. Mr. Peterson, your behavior as documented in these proceedings is deeply disturbing. More concerning still is your apparent inability to recognize the gravity of your actions or their impact on your family. I strongly encourage you to use this opportunity to reflect on your choices and seek meaningful help. The path back to a healthy relationship with your daughter begins with genuine accountability. With that, Judge Montgomery banged his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. Written orders will be filed by close of business today. As the courtroom began to empty, Linda remained seated, overwhelmed by the reality of what had just occurred. After years of feeling powerless, of having her experiences denied and minimized, a court of law had heard her, believed her, and acted to protect her and Olivia. We won, Mom, Olivia whispered, leaning against her side. Just like Grandpa said we would. Linda put her arm around her daughter, holding her close. Yes, we did. But this is just the beginning, sweetheart. There's still a long road ahead. Across the courtroom, Tom was engaged in a heated exchange with his attorney. As if sensing their eyes on him, he looked up, his gaze locking with Linda's. The message in that look was unmistakable. This isn't over. Linda met his stare without flinching. No longer the frightened woman who would have once looked away. She had faced her worst fear confronting Tom, exposing the truth, risking everything for freedom, and survived. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage. One step at a time. Tell me about your week, Linda, Dr. Veronica Bennett said, her voice gentle but direct. The therapist's office was deliberately soothing soft lighting, comfortable furniture, muted colors designed to create a sense of safety and calm. Linda shifted slightly in her chair, still not entirely comfortable with the therapy process despite 6 weeks of weekly sessions. It was challenging. We moved back into the house. Dr. Bennett nodded encouragingly. That must have brought up a lot of feelings. More than I expected, Linda admitted. I thought I'd feel triumphant, taking back what's mine, but it was actually unsettling. Everything looks the same, the furniture, the pictures, the color of the walls, but it feels completely different, like the physical space holds memories. Exactly when I walk into the kitchen and remember standing there while Tom criticized my cooking. I pass the living room wall and remember being shoved against it. Even the master bedroom. Linda shook her head. I couldn't sleep there. I moved into the guest room. That's a very normal reaction, Dr. Bennett assured her. Spaces hold trauma memories just as powerfully as our minds do. Have you considered what you want to do with the house long term? Linda sighed, running a hand through her hair, which she'd recently cut into a shoulder-length style, one of many small acts of reclaiming her identity. Logically, I should sell it. It's too big for just Olivia and me, and the mortgage is substantial. But it's also the most valuable asset in the divorce. And my attorney says holding on to it gives us leverage. And emotionally, Linda considered the question. Part of me wants to burn it to the ground, she said with a small, surprised laugh. Is that terrible? Bennett smiled. Not at all. It's honest. The house represents years of trauma and control. Wanting to completely break free from that is natural. Olivia loves her room, though, and the neighborhood. Her school is nearby. It would mean another major change for her, on top of everything else. Have you asked her how she feels about the house? Linda paused, realizing she hadn't. In her effort to protect Olivia from additional stress, she'd fallen into the pattern of making assumptions about what her daughter needed. No, I haven't. I should do that. Children often surprise us with their resilience and insight, Dr. Bennett observed, especially children like Olivia, who have already demonstrated remarkable awareness. The therapist glanced at her notes. Speaking of Olivia, how are her sessions going with Dr. Lowe? Good, I think. She seems to connect with him. He says she's processing the trauma in age-appropriate ways, but that she's also showing signs of what he called parentification, taking on adult responsibilities and worries. Bennett nodded. Common in children from homes with domestic violence, they often become hypervigilant, always watching for signs of danger, trying to protect the victimized parent. That's Olivia exactly. Even now, with Tom gone, she checks the doors at night, asks if I've remembered to set the alarm, worries if I'm late coming home from work. Linda's voice caught. She shouldn't have to carry that burden. She's 9 years old. Children heal at their own pace, just like adults. The good news is that Olivia has something many children in similar situations don't have: clear evidence that her actions made a difference. She set out to protect you, and she succeeded. That sense of agency can be powerful in healing trauma. Linda considered this. It was true that despite the ongoing challenges, Olivia showed remarkable strength. She still had nightmares and moments of anxiety, but she also had a new confidence, a certainty that she could affect change in her world. And what about you? Linda Bennett asked, shifting the focus. You've returned to work, moved back into the house, been managing the legal proceedings. How are you taking care of yourself through all this? The question caught Linda off guard. Self-care had never been high on her priority list during her marriage to Tom, when her energy was consumed by anticipating his needs and moods. Even now, with her newfound freedom, she found herself focused primarily on Olivia's well-being and the practical demands of their new life. I'm not sure I am, she admitted. Taking care of myself, there's so much to manage: the divorce proceedings, the financial restructuring, Olivia's needs, rebuilding my career. That's a lot for anyone to handle, Dr. Bennett acknowledged. But recovery from trauma requires attention to your own healing, not just to practical matters. What brings you joy, Linda? What makes you feel strong or peaceful or alive? Linda struggled to answer. What had once brought her joy before Tom? Before the fear and control had slowly erased her sense of self, I used to love to read, she said finally. And hike. I was actually quite athletic in college trail running, rock climbing. Tom thought those activities were beneath his wife's dignity. Control often extends to limiting activities that bring independence or confidence. Dr. Bennett observed, would you like to try reconnecting with those parts of yourself? I don't know if I can, Linda confessed. I feel so different now, older, more cautious. Start small, Dr. Bennett suggested. Maybe a local hiking trail with Olivia or joining a book club. The goal isn't to recapture exactly who you were before, but to discover who you are now, who you want to become in this new chapter. Linda nodded slowly, the idea taking root. Who did she want to become for so long? Her identity had been defined in relation to Tom, his wife, the mother of his child, the manager of his home. Now she had the freedom and the responsibility to define herself. I think I'd like that, she said finally, to discover who I am now. Bennett smiled. That's the work we're doing here, Linda. And from what I've seen, the woman you're becoming is pretty remarkable. As winter deepened and the holidays approached, Linda and Olivia established new routines in their reclaimed home. Christmas would be different this year. No elaborate Peterson family gathering with its undercurrent of judgment and tension. No performative gift exchange where Tom's presents to Linda were always public demonstrations of his wealth and her dependence. Instead, they planned a quiet celebration with Colonel Carter, who had extended his stay in Connecticut indefinitely, renting a small apartment near their home. They would have a real tree. Tom had always insisted on an artificial one, homemade cookies Tom had considered baking messy, and gifts chosen with thought rather than status in mind. One evening in mid-December, Linda found Olivia sitting at the kitchen table, focused intently on her tablet. Since the court proceedings, the device had transformed from a tool of secret documentation to a normal part of childhood again used for homework, games, video calls with friends. Math homework, Linda asked, setting a mug of hot chocolate beside her daughter. Olivia looked up, a slight flush on her cheeks. No, actually, I'm writing something. Oh, what are you writing? Olivia hesitated, then turned the tablet so Linda could see. It's about what happened, about how I collected evidence and how we got away from Dad. Ms. Winters says writing about difficult experiences can help make sense of them. Linda scanned the document, her heart constricting at the matter-of-fact way Olivia described the abuse she had witnessed and the fear she had lived with. But there was something else in the writing, too, pride in her own actions, a sense of justice fulfilled, hope for their future. This is really powerful. Olivia, Linda said softly, you're a natural writer. Do you think other kids might read it someday? Kids whose parents hurt each other? Linda considered the question carefully. Maybe, if you wanted to share it, it might help them understand they were not alone, that they can take action too. Olivia nodded seriously. That's what I was thinking. Not right away, but someday. She took a sip of her hot chocolate, leaving a small mustache of whipped cream that reminded Linda forcefully of her daughter's still tender age. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course, anything. Are you going to go on dates now since you and Dad are getting divorced? The question was so unexpected that Linda nearly choked on her own hot chocolate. I haven't thought about it. Honestly, it's still very early in the divorce process, and we're both adjusting to so many changes. But someday, Linda studied her daughter's face, trying to understand the motivation behind the question. Possibly someday. Would that bother you? Olivia considered this seriously. Not if he was nice, really nice. Not pretend nice like Dad was with the other people. She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. But how would you know if he was really nice or just pretending? And there it was, the fear at the heart of Olivia's question. How could they trust again? After being so thoroughly deceived, how could they believe in someone's kindness when they had lived with the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing? That's a really good question, Linda said honestly. I think I think we'd have to trust ourselves more than we trust him. At first, trust our own instincts, our own observations. Watch for the small signs we missed with Dad. Like if he gets too angry over little things. Exactly. Or if he tries to control what we do or who we see. Or if he makes you feel bad about yourself. Linda reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. You noticed that too, huh? Olivia nodded solemnly. Dad was always telling you what was wrong with you, but there wasn't anything wrong with you. He was the one who was wrong. The simple truth of this statement, delivered with a child's directness, brought tears to Linda's eyes. You're absolutely right. And that's something I'm learning to really believe, not just know intellectually. What's the difference? Well, knowing something intellectually means you understand it in your head, like a fact you learn in school. But believing it means you feel it in your heart, so deeply that it shapes how you see yourself in the world. Olivia considered this. Like the difference between knowing the stove is hot because someone told you, and believing it's hot because you touched it and got burned. That's a perfect analogy, Linda said, impressed by her daughter's insight. And sometimes, after you've been burned badly, it takes a long time to trust any stove again, even one that might be perfectly safe. So you might not date anyone for a long time? Linda smiled gently. Probably not. Right now, I'm focusing on rebuilding our life, on my job, on helping both of us heal, and on discovering who I am when I'm not trying to be who someone else wants me to be. I like who you are now, Olivia said simply. You laugh more, and you don't look scared all the time. Linda blinked back tears. I like who I am now, too. And I love who you are, brave and smart and kind, even after everything you've been through. We protected each other, Olivia said, echoing the words she'd spoken on Thanksgiving night. That's what real family does. Later that evening, after Olivia had gone to bed, Linda sat in the living room recently redecorated with new furniture to replace the pieces Tom had selected and reflected on their conversation. Dating was the furthest thing from her mind right now, but Olivia's question had touched on something more fundamental than romance. Trust. The ability to believe that what appeared to be real was actually real. The confidence to rely on her own perceptions rather than allowing them to be overwritten by someone else's narrative. Tom had expertly dismantled her trust in herself, in her judgment, in the basic fairness of the world. Rebuilding that trust would be a long, complex process, full of setbacks and moments of doubt, but sitting in her reclaimed home, listening to the soft sounds of her daughter sleeping peacefully upstairs, Linda felt the first fragile tendrils of that trust beginning to grow again. Trust in herself, in her strength, in her capacity to create a life defined by freedom rather than fear. It was a beginning, and for tonight, that was enough. The emergency room of Hartford General Hospital hummed with the controlled chaos typical of a Friday night. Linda Peterson moved efficiently between exam rooms, her nursing scrubs a far cry from the carefully coordinated outfits Tom had once insisted she wear. At 41, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from rebuilding a life on her own terms. Linda, we've got an incoming case I'd like you to handle, Dr. Ramirez said, appearing at her side with a chart. 35-year-old female, facial contusions, possible broken wrist. She's saying she fell downstairs, but the pattern of injuries is inconsistent with that story. Linda nodded, understanding immediately. Domestic violence protocol. Yes, she's got a 5-year-old with her too. The child appears physically unharmed, but is extremely withdrawn. I'll take it, Linda said, taking the chart and scanning the information. Is Meredith on call tonight? Meredith Zhao, the same advocate who had assisted Linda 3 years earlier, now worked closely with the hospital's domestic violence intervention program. Already paged her. She'll meet you in exam room 3. Linda made her way to the exam room, pausing outside to center herself. These cases always affected her deeply, triggering memories of her own experience while simultaneously reinforcing her sense of purpose. She had returned to school shortly after leaving Tom, completing an accelerated nursing program with a specialization in trauma care. Now, 2 years into her new career, she had found her calling working with victims of violence and abuse. Taking a deep breath, she entered the room. The woman sitting on the exam table looked up with the hyper-vigilant gaze Linda recognized immediately, the look of someone constantly assessing potential threats, calculating responses, trying to avoid the next explosion. "Hello, Mrs. Taylor. I'm Linda, one of the nurses who'll be caring for you tonight." She kept her voice gentle but matter-of-fact, avoiding the pitying tone that could feel so diminishing to someone in crisis. "Can you tell me what happened?" "Like I told the intake nurse. I fell down the stairs at home," Mrs. Taylor replied, her words rehearsed. "I'm so clumsy sometimes. My husband is always telling me to be more careful." Linda nodded, beginning the standard examination while noting the defensive bruising on the woman's forearms, the finger-shaped marks on her neck, the old, yellowing bruises partially hidden by makeup. "That must have been scary. Were you carrying anything when you fell?" "Just laundry. It was stupid of me." In the corner of the room, a small girl sat perfectly still on a chair, her eyes following Linda's every movement. She reminded Linda painfully of Olivia at her most watchful, her most afraid. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" Linda asked gently. "Lily," the child whispered, glancing quickly at her mother for permission to speak. "That's a beautiful name," Linda said, continuing her examination of Mrs. Taylor's injuries. "You know, Lily, I have a daughter too. She's a bit older than you, 12 now. When she was about your age, we had to come to the hospital sometimes too." Mrs. Taylor tensed under Linda's hands. "We really need to get going soon. My husband will be home from his business trip, and he'll be worried if we're not there. The doctor will need to x-ray your wrist before you can leave," Linda explained. "And we need to document your injuries for the medical record." "Document?" Fear flashed across Mrs. Taylor's face. "Is that really necessary?" "It was just a fall." Linda met the woman's eyes directly. "Mrs. Taylor, may I call you Jessica?" "Jessica, I'm going to be completely honest with you. The injuries you have aren't consistent with falling downstairs. They're consistent with being grabbed, struck, and choked." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head firmly. "You don't understand. He just gets stressed sometimes. He has a lot of pressure at work, and I'm not always as organized as he needs me to be." The familiar justifications, the internalized blame, the desperate protection of the abuser. Linda had voiced these same rationalizations countless times. "I understand better than you might think," she said quietly. "I was where you are now, not too long ago, making excuses, hiding bruises, living in constant fear of saying or doing the wrong thing." Jessica stared at her, recognition dawning. My husband was respected in the community, successful, charming to everyone but me. He controlled everything: our finances, my friendships, what I wore, what I said, how I parented our daughter." Linda continued the examination as she spoke, her professional demeanor intact despite the personal nature of her disclosure. "I stayed for years, believing I had no options, believing I deserved the treatment I received." "What changed?" Jessica asked, her voice barely audible. Linda smiled slightly. "My daughter, she was 9, about Lily's age now. She started secretly recording the abuse, documenting what was happening to us. And then she sent the evidence to my father, who helped us escape." She finished noting Jessica's injuries and set the chart aside. "It was the hardest and best thing I've ever done, leaving. Starting over. Building a life free from fear." Jessica glanced at Lily, who was watching the exchange with the unnerving focus of a child who understood far more than adults realized. "I can't," she whispered. "He'd find us. He'd take Lily." "That's what I thought too," Linda acknowledged. "But there are resources, protections I didn't know existed. People who can help navigate the legal system, find safe housing, provide counseling for both of you." A soft knock at the door preceded Meredith Zhao's entrance. After 3 years of working together, she and Linda had developed a seamless approach to these sensitive cases. "Jessica, this is Meredith from the Family Justice Center. Linda explained. She's not here to force you to do anything. She's here to explain your options. Whatever you decide to do next. Meredith smiled warmly. Exactly. My job is information and support, not decisions. Those remain entirely yours. Linda prepared to leave them to their conversation, but Jessica reached out suddenly, grasping her hand. Would you stay? Just for a few minutes? Of course, Linda said, squeezing her hand gently. As long as you need. An hour later, Linda left the exam room, emotionally drained but cautiously hopeful. Jessica had agreed to speak with a domestic violence advocate, to have her injuries properly documented, and to consider a temporary stay at the women's shelter while she explored more permanent solutions. It wasn't a complete commitment to leaving her abuser, but it was a first step, often the hardest one to take. As her shift ended and Linda changed out of her scrubs, her phone buzzed with a text message from Olivia. Grandpa's flight landed. We're picking him up now. See you at home. Love you hearts, Linda smiled, typing a quick response. Drive carefully. Love you both. Save me some of those birthday cupcakes. Tomorrow was Olivia's 13th birthday, and Colonel Carter had flown in from Virginia to celebrate. He had finally retired fully from his consulting work and was considering a permanent move to Connecticut to be closer to them. The three of them had formed a tight unit over the past 3 years, supporting each other through the challenges of rebuilding their lives. The divorce had been finalized 18 months after Thanksgiving, contentious until the very end as Tom fought for every asset, every concession. He had never acknowledged the abuse, never shown genuine remorse, never completed the court-ordered anger management program that would have allowed unsupervised visitation with Olivia. The supervised visits themselves had been tense and increasingly infrequent. Tom, unable to control the narrative or intimidate his daughter under the watchful eye of professional monitors, had grown frustrated with Olivia's quiet resistance to his charm offensive. Eventually, he had stopped scheduling visits altogether, blaming Linda for poisoning their daughter against him. In many ways, his absence was a blessing, allowing both Linda and Olivia to heal without the constant reopening of wounds that contact with him created. Yet Linda also recognized the complex grief Olivia felt at essentially losing her father not to death or distance, but to his own inability to love without controlling, to connect without dominating. As she drove home through the quiet suburban streets, Linda reflected on how much had changed in 3 years. The house that had once been Tom's showcase was now truly their home, redecorated room by room to reflect their own tastes and preferences. The master bedroom that Linda had initially avoided was now a peaceful retreat with colors and textures she had chosen herself. Olivia's room had evolved from a childish pink Tom's choice, despite Olivia's preference for blue, to a vibrant space filled with books, art, and photographs. Professionally, Linda had surpassed her own expectations. After completing her nursing degree, she had been hired immediately by Hartford General, where her personal experience with domestic violence made her an asset to their trauma team. She now served on the hospital's domestic violence task force and occasionally spoke at community events about recognizing and responding to abuse. Financially, they were stable if not wealthy. The divorce settlement had included the house, child support, and a portion of Tom's retirement accounts. Linda's nursing salary covered their daily expenses, allowing them to save the child support for Olivia's college fund. It wasn't the luxury lifestyle Tom had provided, but it was secure and, more importantly, it was entirely under Linda's control. As she pulled into her driveway, Linda saw Colonel Carter's rental car already parked in front. The house windows glowed warmly in the early evening darkness, and she could see that Olivia moving about in the kitchen, likely putting final touches on the birthday preparations. This, Linda thought as she gathered her things, was what safety felt like. Not the false security of financial dependence or the illusory protection of a controlling partner, but the genuine stability of self-reliance and healthy relationships. They had built this, she and Olivia and Colonel Carter, piece by piece, day by day, choice by choice. Inside, she was greeted by the scent of Olivia's favorite lasagna, the recipe a deliberate departure from the one Tom had critiqued so harshly, and the sound of her daughter's laughter as Colonel Carter recounted some military misadventure. "Mom," Olivia called, spotting her in the doorway. Grandpa's telling me about the time he had to parachute into a training exercise and landed in a cow pasture. Linda hugged her father, then her daughter, noticing as she always did now the changes in Olivia. At nearly 13, she was taller, her features maturing, but the most significant transformation was in her spirit. The hypervigilance had gradually given way to normal teenage alertness. The shadows that had once haunted her eyes appeared less frequently. The nightmares that had plagued her in the early months after leaving Tom had diminished to occasional stress dreams. "Sorry I'm late," Linda said, hanging up her coat. "Busy night at the ER." "Did you help someone?" Olivia asked, setting the table with the casual confidence of a child who knew she was valued and heard. Like us, Linda exchanged a glance with her father, who nodded almost imperceptibly. They had always been honest with Olivia, in age-appropriate ways, about Linda's work with victims of domestic violence. "I hope so," Linda replied. "A mom and her daughter, actually. The little girl reminded me a lot of you at that age." Olivia considered this as she arranged napkins with careful precision. "Did you tell her about me, about what I did with the recordings?" "I mentioned it. I think it helped her mother see that children understand more than we sometimes give them credit for." "Will they be okay? The mom and the little girl?" Linda sighed, moving to help with the dinner preparations. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. The mom is considering going to the shelter, at least temporarily." "That's the first step," Olivia said with the wisdom of experience. "Getting somewhere safe. Then you can figure out the next step, and the next one after that." "Exactly right," Colonel Carter agreed, his pride in his granddaughter evident. "One step at a time." As they sat down to dinner, Linda looked at the two people who had become her foundation, her father, whose unwavering support had made their escape possible, and her daughter, whose courage had changed the course of all their lives. "Before we eat," she said, raising her water glass, "I'd like to propose a toast to Olivia on the eve of your 13th birthday. You've shown more bravery, wisdom, and compassion in your young life than many people do in a lifetime. I am so incredibly proud of the person you are becoming." "Here, here," Colonel Carter added, raising his own glass, "to my remarkable granddaughter." Olivia blushed, but her smile was genuine. "Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Grandpa. But I wasn't the only brave one. We all were." "That's true," Linda acknowledged. "And that's the real toast, isn't it? To all of us, to family, real family that protects each other, supports each other, and helps each other heal." "To family," Colonel Carter and Olivia echoed, their glasses meeting with a clear, bright sound that seemed to Linda like the perfect note on which to end their story, not with the darkness that they had escaped, but with the light they had found together. Later that night, after Colonel Carter had retired to the guest room, and Linda had tucked Olivia in a ritual the almost teenager still secretly enjoyed, she paused in the hallway outside her daughter's room. From inside, she could hear the soft tapping of fingers on a tablet screen. She smiled, no longer afraid of what that sound might mean. These days, Olivia's tablet held normal teenage concerns: social media, music, messages from friends, homework assignments. The days of secret recordings and desperate plans were behind them. Or were they, Linda wondered suddenly. Perhaps they weren't behind them at all, but rather transformed into something different, the recordings now taking the form of Olivia's writing about their experience, the plans focusing on how to help others rather than how to escape themselves. The evidence Olivia had gathered 3 years ago had done more than free them from Tom's control. It had become the foundation of a new narrative, one in which they were not victims but survivors, not passive recipients of abuse, but active architects of their own liberation. As Linda made her way to her own room, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for that small, brave girl who had refused to accept that fear was the price of family, who had documented the truth when adults couldn't or wouldn't, who had trusted her own perceptions when everyone else demanded she deny them. Evidence from little hands, Linda thought as she prepared for bed, the most powerful kind of all. Olivia Peterson sat in the auditorium of her high school, heart pounding as she waited for her name to be called. At 15, she was the youngest finalist in the statewide essay contest, competing against students up to 3 years her senior. The essay she had submitted, titled Evidence from Little Hands, A Child's Journey Through Domestic Violence, had begun as a private journal entry 3 years earlier. Over time, with encouragement from her therapist, her mother, and her English teacher, she had developed it into a powerful narrative about her experience documenting her father's abuse and helping her mother escape. And the first place winner in the personal narrative category, the announcer said, for her courageous and insightful essay on family violence and a child's agency in creating change, Olivia Peterson. The applause was thunderous as Olivia made her way to the stage, conscious of her mother and grandfather standing in the audience, their faces shining with pride and emotion. At the podium, she unfolded her prepared remarks, took a deep breath, and began. 3 years ago, I was a 9-year-old girl with a tablet and a plan. I lived in a home where fear was normal, where walking on eggshells was a way of life, where my mother's safety depended on saying the right thing, cooking the perfect meal, never challenging my father's authority. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, her initial nervousness giving way to the conviction that had driven her since that fateful Thanksgiving. I used to think my story was unique, but I've learned that it's tragically common. Millions of children witness domestic violence every year. Many of them, like me, become hypervigilant, constantly watching for signs of danger, trying to protect their victimized parent, carrying burdens no child should have to bear. She glanced at her mother, drawing strength from her presence. What makes my story different isn't what happened to us. It's what we did about it. With a tablet, a school project about family communication, and the support of key adults in my life, I documented the abuse my mother suffered. I created a record that couldn't be denied or explained away. I gathered evidence that ultimately freed us both. The audience was utterly silent, captivated by this poised young woman speaking such difficult truths. I'm sharing my story today not to expose my family's pain, but to offer hope to other children living in homes where love and fear are dangerously intertwined, to tell them that they are not powerless, that their voices matter, that their observations are valid, to remind adults that children see everything, understand more than you think, and deserve to be heard. Olivia paused, looking out at the sea of faces: students, teachers, parents, judges. Somewhere in that audience might be another child living with the secret shame of family violence, another mother trapped by fear and isolation, another potential ally who could help break the cycle. My mother is now an emergency room nurse specializing in trauma care. She helps other women recognize and escape abuse. My grandfather, a retired military officer, volunteers with organizations that provide housing and legal services to victims of domestic violence. And I write, I speak, I bear witness, because I learned at 9 years old that evidence is power, and that even the smallest hands can hold that power and use it for good. She folded her notes, delivering her final words directly to the audience, without prepared text. If you're a child living in fear, know this: you are not responsible for the violence in your home. You cannot fix the adults in your life, but you can tell someone. You can document what's happening. You can trust your own perceptions, even when others deny them. Her voice broke slightly, but she continued with determination. And if you're an adult suspecting that a child you know is witnessing abuse, please listen. Believe them. Help them create safety. Be the person I found in my grandfather, my teacher, the detective who responded to our case, someone who sees the truth and acts on it. She took a deep breath, offering a small smile as she concluded. My essay ends with the words my mother and I now live by: evidence from little hands, the most powerful kind of all. Thank you. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. As Olivia accepted her award and returned to her seat, she caught sight of a woman and a young girl in the back of the auditorium. The woman was wiping tears from her eyes, and the girl, perhaps 10 or 11, was watching Olivia with an expression of wonder and recognition. It took a moment for Olivia to place them, But then she remembered the patient her mother had treated 3 years earlier, on the night before Olivia's 13th birthday. Jessica Taylor and her daughter Lily. They had made it out too. As the ceremony concluded and Olivia joined her mother and grandfather in the lobby, Jessica approached hesitantly, Lily at her side. Olivia, you probably don't remember us, but I do remember, Olivia assured her. You're Jessica and Lily. My mom helped you at the hospital. Jessica nodded, emotion making speech difficult. We both wanted to hear you speak today. Your mother, she saved our lives that night. And now you, I thought your word, are you okay now? Olivia asked Lily directly, recognizing in the younger girl's eyes the same watchfulness she had once carried. Lily nodded. We have our own apartment. Mom has a job, and I don't have to be scared anymore. Neither do I, Olivia said, smiling at her. It gets better, you know, the nightmares, the worry, the feeling like you have to protect everyone. It all gets better. As her mother and Jessica fell into conversation, Olivia realized that her small act of courage 3 years ago had created ripples she could never have imagined reaching this mother and daughter, and perhaps others in the audience today, and anyone who might read her essay in the future. One child with a tablet and a plan, one piece of evidence that couldn't be denied, one voice refusing to be silenced. It was enough. It had always been enough. And as Olivia stood surrounded by her family, not just her mother and grandfather, but this wider circle of survivors and allies they had gathered along the way, she knew with absolute certainty that the evidence she had collected had done more than document abuse. It had documented resilience, courage, and the enduring power of truth. Evidence from little hands, indeed,